When you're ready.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Geary, the Vice President of the Reading League of Connecticut. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Margaret Goldberg. Margaret Goldberg is a literacy coach in a large urban district in California. She has held a variety of roles, including early literacy lead, site-based literacy coach, and reading interventionist. In every role, she has worked to help schools and districts align instruction with reading research. Margaret is the co-founder of the Right to Read Project, which is a group of teachers, readers, and activists committed to the pursuit of equity through literacy. Her writing is published on the Right to Read Project blog and on the Reading Rockets website. As a teacher, her impact on education and the science of reading has helped transform instructional practices across the United States. Her work has been highlighted by the renowned educational reporter, Emily Hanford. We are so pleased to have Margaret join us to share her journey into the science of reading and how it changed her practices.
Thanks so much, Amy. So we're going to talk today about things I've tried, the things I've tried that were successful, and some of the struggles and failures that I have had. In this presentation, we're going to talk just a little bit to set the stage so that you know the demographics of the students with whom I work. We are also going to be talking about a lesson example of some unsystematic instruction that I attempted to use. Then I'll go through a lesson example with some systematic reading instruction. We'll talk about the instructional implications of those two approaches, and then we'll have some time to be able to reflect and maybe talk about some of the things that you're noticing in those lessons. So to start off, in 2015, I arrived at a school with 290 students. Almost all of them were from low-income families, and just about half of them were English language learners. And the data in the first grade looked like this. So we had 87% of our students in need of intervention, and just 13% of them in the first grade were doing okay. And I think one of the things that should have been a big red flag to me, if it wasn't that big red flag of data on the screen right there, it was realizing that these children had had a lot of guided reading instruction when they were in kindergarten, and they were coming to me, and my job as an interventionist was to provide more balanced literacy guided reading instruction to them. The program that I was given to teach was from a common curriculum found in many schools. It's representative of a common approach to teaching reading. And this was the program I was given to teach for my intervention. Prior to this particular lesson example, students had had 26 lessons with me while in first grade reading intervention. What I knew about my students came from reading records. So I had a group of 3 students in one particular group, and I knew that Alexa read with 98% accuracy from level B books. I knew that Angel read with slightly less accuracy, as did Kylie. These students were reading predictable books, and you'll notice when it was coming to their strengths, they were paying attention to the meaning of the text, maybe the structure of the sentences, but they weren't paying attention to what my program called the visual component of reading, meaning they weren't actually looking at the words while they were reading, they were reciting text, and I kept trying to direct their attention to the words on the page by encouraging them to point at the words. In this particular lesson, the goals were to have students use the CVC pattern and to learn some high frequency words: have, our, on, and some. So for the lesson steps, we started with rereading previously read books. My program told me to prompt for self-monitoring. So I was supposed to say, try that again and think about what would make sense. But this prompt didn't seem to address the issue that they weren't paying attention to the words on the page. So I started asking them to point to the words and used another prompt in the program, does that look right? After the rereading of books, we did some work with phonics using Elkonin boxes. And then we were to apply those skills to reading a text. I was supposed to introduce the book, have the students read it, and then discuss the text. And then if there was time left over, and to be honest, there never was time left over, but if there was time left over, there were optional activities like making words with magnetic letters or coloring in an ABC book, or possibly doing some more phonemic awareness work. So during the warm-up, the students would start with reading a predictable book. And I think one of the things that was so challenging to me was I was seeing them only want to read books that they had memorized. And I noticed them really wanting to rush through it, like saying the book quickly was somehow a sign of success, and I was trying to slow them down. After they were done rereading the predictable books, then came the Elkonin boxes. So I would say something like, say get. What's the first sound you hear in get? They'd say g. I'd say, what letter do we use for g? And sometimes they would struggle. Sometimes they'd be able to say G. We'd say get. What's the next sound you hear? Often I would get blank looks. We would try to say g, eh. The answer is eh. What letter? And E. And we would work our way through the word in this way. I was noticing though that they were having a hard time with these tasks unless they were letters that they were particularly familiar with. It didn't seem to help them learn new spelling patterns. Continued on with some more CVC words in the lesson. And then we got to this point where I was supposed to say side, first sound, next sound, the letter I for I. And this is where I was like, last sound D. And then in my lesson plan, it told me that I was supposed to add an E to the end of the word to make it look right. And that didn't really sit with me right, but I didn't know what else to do. There were other words that we did like this with, for example, adding an E to the end to make it look right. But I did the lesson as it was intended to be taught. And I kind of had to sit with this thought. What did students learn about the logic of English spelling from what I had just taught them? And when I realized that things in English, according to my students, needed to look right, we would stick letters onto the end of words to make it look right, or think, does that word look right when we're reading? That was actually the way I had been taught when I was in a whole language classroom in the first grade. So it didn't really work all the way for me, but I was going with it. Then we got into the introducing a story. And at this point, I was supposed to stimulate their interest in the book that we were going to read and help front load the vocabulary that would be in the book. So I would show the title of the book and the cover and ask, have you ever had waffles to eat? What are some things you can put on top of a waffle? And this book is about yummy things you can have on top of waffles. And the energy level started to rise at this point. Kids would get excited. They wanted to talk to me about waffles. And I would have to redirect their attention. Oh no, now actually we're going to read. We're not just chatting about waffles. So I would introduce the book, Our Waffles, and then we'd flip through some of the pages in the book. So I would need to prompt them. What else does the waffle have on it? Get them to say butter, although often they'd be a little distracted by other things in the page. I'd ask students to find the word have and say, what letter would you see first in have? And have students put their finger on the word have and swipe through it left to right. And I did notice that my students were thinking the word is have because it has an H. And often they would think other words were have if they had the letter H. Same thing would happen when we would talk about what else does the waffle have on it? Strawberries. And I'd have students say some and then say, what letter would you see first in some? And they would put their finger on strawberries because that started with the letter S. So I worked my way through the book, following the lesson plan, introducing most of the pages in the book. And I realized I wasn't leaving very much reading for my students to do at all. And when I thought about what this is teaching them about the process of reading a new book, I realized that they were really dependent on my book introduction, my picture walk, and going through the particular words in the book before they started reading it. And I think one of the moments that I realized that this was really not serving students well was when I was in a second grade classroom and a child wasn't focused on her reading from her book box. So I came over to her and I was like, hey, what book are you reading? Which one can we do? Select a book from your book box. And she just shrugged. So I pulled a book out and I was like, this one looks good. Let's do this. And she looked at me and she said, I can't read that book. I don't know it. And I thought about what that means for a second grader to believe that an adult has to walk her through the book in order for her to be able to read that book. And I realized that my students were getting a perception of reading that was incredibly limited. In guided reading, I would have my students, after this heavy book introduction, turn back to the beginning of the book and tell them that they were now going to read this book and try to give them a purpose for reading. So at the end, you'll find out what happens to the waffle. And I would watch my students as they tried to recite the text that I had just trained them on. Let's have some, look at the picture, say blueberries on our waffles. And I started to notice that this is why I was having students who are struggling with reading accuracy and struggling to pay attention to the visual components of the words. They were looking away from them a good portion of the time while they were reading, looking to the picture rather than the word in order to be able to read. At some point, I remember prompting a student to pay attention to the B in bananas. Like, how did you know that that word was bananas? And the kid said, because bananas are long. And I realized, okay, so we're not connecting the sounds in the word that we say with the letters that are on the page. We're coming up with other explanations for why the word bananas might be bananas, because it's long. So I would try to monitor for accuracy, providing corrective feedback where my students needed it as they were reading, trying to help us get excited as we came to the end of the book. And then I'd have to sit and think, well, we just read text. What new vocabulary or concepts did my 6-year-olds learn? And then I'd realized they didn't learn anything because I was giving them books on topics that they were already familiar with, like waffles, because they actually did already need to know quite a lot about the book and the topic in order to be able to recite the predictable book I had just given them. By this time, we would wrap up our lesson with some word work if there was time available. So we might work on the sight word hour, do it with some magnetic letters, color some pictures in their ABC books, play a game. I started incorporating a lot of writing into the lesson. So we would write about the book waffles, hoping that that would help them make some more connections between the letters and sounds in the book. But I was struggling. I was struggling to try to figure out how these activities connected, and I wasn't seeing it. We would go from rereading previously taught books to then jumping into some word work that didn't connect to the books they had just read and didn't really prepare them for the story they were about to read. We'd read a story and then do some word work that seemed really disconnected even from each other. Like if they didn't know what all the letters were and we were working on an ABC book, it seemed surprising that we were working on word work that didn't use those letters. And I realized, a friend and I were talking recently, that this kind of instruction really made me feel like I was committing random acts of literacy. I was knowing that literacy was important. I knew I needed to do a whole bunch of stuff related to teaching reading. I had a lot of activities provided to me in my curriculum, but they weren't connected and they weren't resulting in success for all students. Students who were struggling were continuing to struggle. So when I backed up and kind of analyzed the instruction that I was providing, I was looking particularly at the predictable books that I was giving students. And I was realizing, so the phonics principle for this lesson was CVC words. But I'll give you a moment to look at this text so you can count how many CVC words my students actually got to read in this book. Yeah, 0. So we were doing phonics, but not for the purposes of reading. And it had been 8 lessons since the last time CVC words were a focus. And I introduced this new concept of final ear, long I words. And if we looked at the text, so if I'm connecting now, how did the L-codon boxes with side and like connect to the text that I then gave students to read? Look for the number of final E words with a long I spelling pattern. And there's 0 of them. And students wouldn't see this long I spelling pattern for another 14 lessons. When it came to the high frequency words that I was teaching in this program, I was giving students 2 new words, have and our, and on and some were repeats, but they were from repeats of lessons from a long time ago. Some they hadn't seen for 19 lessons. They did get some practice with these high frequency words. So if you look at the story, you'll see 5 instances of many of the words, 4 of some. Plus, if I got to the magnetic letters, they might get a little extra practice with our. But here's the thing, the kids weren't actually really looking at the words while they were reading. So they weren't getting much out of this high frequency word work because they were reciting a predictable pattern that was actually getting in the way of them attending to the high frequency words that were there in the text. I ended up going through the scope and sequence of the program and looking at the text and looking at the high frequency words in the program. And here's what I noticed. No wonder why my students couldn't remember the high frequency words from one book to the next. Because if you look across the top of the chart from lessons 1 to 26, you'll be able to see what high frequency words were in the books my students were reading. And you can see so much time passed before they would ever see that word again. And the words seem to be introduced almost in a random order. Like I can't logically say why we got those words in that particular order. I was able to see why my students were having gaps in their knowledge because there was gaps in the instruction. So when I came upon this quote by Dr. Louisa Moats, it explained everything to me. Leveled books cannot be the basis for a systematic, explicit approach to beginning reading instruction. With each advancing levels, students encounter many untaught phonic patterns and words. Lacking the tools to decode the books, students become ever more reliant on memorization and guesswork unless they are lucky enough to intuit the print code from exposure or incidental teaching. So when I thought about the data of the students at my school, I realized, there was that 13% that was doing okay. Those were these students, the students who are lucky enough to intuit the print code from the incidental teaching that they were receiving. For the rest of the students, I was offering them no path forward to find more success. Luckily, there was another program available at my school. It was dusty in shelves just on the side of the book room, but I pulled it out because that program was designed to teach decoding. And I realized that that was a weakness in our balanced literacy approach. So I'm going to show you a different lesson, a lesson I actually was teaching simultaneously with the balanced literacy instruction I was giving before I made a decision to switch entirely to this approach of teaching reading. So this is also from a first grade reading program, also from a popular curriculum, but this one is systematic, sequential, it's explicit, provides cumulative practice. This particular lesson comes 60 lessons into the program, and I'm choosing to do it because I want you to be able to compare the treatment of the I blink E spelling pattern to the previous lesson. So for this lesson, I was introducing the concept of final E. It was the student's first introduction to long vowels. And we had some high frequency words, large, every, and after that we would work with. What I knew about my students was much more detailed than what I knew with a guided reading instruction. With this program, I knew exactly what spelling sound patterns the students knew and what they didn't know. And the program helped me to place students at their point of instructional need. So I knew that the students that I was working with, giving them this particular lesson, that they had done a pretty good job with sounding out all of the words that fit the spelling patterns they had been given previously. And they were doing a pretty good job of recognizing high frequency words instantaneously. In this lesson, we start with phonological segmentation. This particular lesson had an emphasis on final sound. Then I would provide phonics and decodable word work. So introducing the spelling pattern that we were doing, reviewing previously taught spelling patterns, applying that to read a decodable word list, then introducing some high frequency words and reviewing the previously taught words, and then applying all of this learning to dictation and then also to reading. So if we take a look at this lesson, let's start with phonological awareness. And for this lesson, I would say something like, say side, sound side, and students would say side. Last sound, d. Say take, take, sound take, t, ache. Last sound, k. So I was calling their attention to the final sound in these long vowel words in phonological awareness. Then we dive into the phonics work. And in this program, I was given really explicit instruction. Like, the kids already know how to read the words on the left-hand side. You're teaching them to read the words on the right-hand side. So have them read mad, explain that this word is made. The A has a long sound because there is an E at the end of the word, made. Have them read pet and contrast that with Pete because of the E at the end of that word, and introduce the concept of final E, referencing the spelling sound pattern cards. So pointing out to them that in make cake, we have the spelling pattern A blank E. The tree card, we have E blank E, continuing on for each one of the final E spelling patterns introduced in this lesson. And this visual was up for them at all times during the day, so they could reference back to it during writing time, for example, or any point in time they might need it for their reading. Then I had handheld cards, and these handheld cards had the spelling patterns kids were practicing. And I would mix those handheld cards in with the short vowel cards to ensure there was no confusion. And also in with some of the spelling sound patterns that might have been tricky for them from previous lessons. Mix all those handheld cards up and have them practice these spelling sound patterns before we would apply them to the purposes of reading with a decodable word list. And one of the things I started to realize is that the decodable word list was really important because it didn't allow students the opportunity to use context to guess words. They actually had to attend to the spelling sound patterns in the words because there was nothing else to support them, such as syntax or pictures or anything like that. So I could really tell how well they were mastering the phonics I was teaching them at this point in the lesson. So when we pause and think about the instruction I've detailed so far in lesson 2, we can think about what students learned about the logic of English spelling. Students who received this instruction actually expected English spelling to make sense. And they would ask really smart, thoughtful questions like, why does have an E at the end if it's not have? I'd be like, that's brilliant. And at that time, I needed to look that spelling rule up and be like, oh, it's because there's no English word that ends in the letter V. But the fact that they expected it to make sense meant that they were feeling more successful with their learning and the reason to apply it to their reading and writing. The program that I was teaching did have sight words, and I recognize that that is a topic that lots of people are discussing. There's some heated debate. One of the concerns that I had when I saw them described as sight words is that I was learning that reading is not a visual process. And I was concerned about them being called sight words as if they were supposed to memorize them visually. So I started digging into the research on sight words, asking this question, and Dr. Castles has some great words on this. Is sight word teaching effective? The short answer is yes. Numerous experimental studies have reported substantial and sustained improvements in children's word reading following targeted teaching of those words in both typical and struggling readers. The longer answer is that, of course, effectiveness varies according to the nature of the teaching, and more research comparing the efficacy of different methods is sorely needed. So this particular lesson had a method of teaching sight words that's called the read, spell, read method. So I would introduce the sight word in the context of a sentence. He drives a large truck. our sight word is large. And this is an opportunity to point out that large has a surprising spelling pattern in it. My students at this point in time didn't know the soft G sound, G followed by an IE or a Y. Do the same thing with every. This word might have been confusing to them because they knew the word very, and now they were learning every is not the way they might have expected it. So when working with these words, my students would read, spell, read them. So large, L-A-R-G-E, large, every, E-V-E-R-Y, every. And then these words on handheld cards or put into a deck of handheld cards with some previously taught high frequency words that they were practicing. They would read, spell, read each one of these words. And again, no context for them to be able to guess what these words were and nothing to distract them from attending to the spellings in the words. After this, they did some dictation. And for this, they had paper in front of them. They had their sound spelling cards. And I would say a word like note. I wrote a note to the teacher. Say note, sound note, write the sounds you hear in note. And then I could look to see what they had written, referencing the wall cards with the spelling sound patterns if necessary, and correct any errors that I was noticing in their work. So we would continue this with other words that either matched the spelling sound pattern we were practicing, or like tap allowed them to think, oh, I don't just stick an E at the end of every word. I have to really listen to the sound of the word and find out if it's a long vowel sound. We do some practice with some high frequency words as well, read, spell, reading them, and then also work on a sentence that incorporated the phonics that they had been taught. After this encoding practice, then we'd get into the story. I would introduce the story, and I noticed that I was front loading basically none of the words in the text unless they were really going to be particularly challenging, like emperor penguins, for example. I would just want to let them know that we were reading about a certain type of penguins, tell them a little bit about penguins in case they didn't have the background knowledge necessary to engage with this text already. And then if possible, extend the learning a little bit by connecting to a map, for example. And then I'd give this text to my students. And the thing was, they could totally read it because they had been taught everything that they needed to know about the words on the page in front of them. So the amount of reading that I left for my students to do was so much more, and their confidence and their enthusiasm about doing it was higher because they realized that what they were doing was learning about something new. They were learning some new vocabulary and some concepts that were really interesting, and they wanted to talk about the stories afterwards. There's only so much you can say about a predictable book. There's a lot more you can say about this particular story that I was just showing you. So in the resource guide to foundational skills for California's framework is this quote: if children have been taught the most common sounds for the letters P and A, they may be confused by Phil's name card or an alphabet book that states that A is for art. These inconsistencies should be noted when they are encountered. Another example of this might be an example of a word like large, for example, or of. Initially, beginning readers' exposure to print that matches instruction should be maximized. Otherwise, the instruction seems irrelevant and is confusing to learners. This explained my feelings of random acts of literacy I was committing when I was doing word work that was disconnected to the text my students were seeing. In the second lesson example, you'll see that there's a great connection between the word work that we were doing and the actual reading and writing. So if we look at this text, penguins, that I gave my students, understanding that the phonics principle I was focused on was the final E spelling pattern. I'll give you a moment to skim the text so that you can see how many final E opportunities were there. 27 in one reading session. And the final E spelling pattern would appear in every subsequent lesson. And the concept was assessed after 4 lessons so that I could tell if I needed to go back and reteach the concept of final E. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The amount of time devoted to decodable text depends on how quickly beginning readers grasp the code. Some children need considerable practice with decodable books. Others need less because they more quickly acquire and apply the skills. Learners should be provided instruction in texts that reflect and advance their skills. When we look at the same text for the high frequency words, I taught my students large and every with the read, spell, read pattern. And I also had some review words that appeared in this story, quite a few of them actually. And all of them were getting extensive practice. Students were able to see the high frequency words that they had been practicing over and over in text. So when I charted out the introduction of high frequency words in this particular program, you can see that once the words were introduced, they were practiced in every subsequent lesson until students had mastered them and we no longer needed to do practice with those words. So let's contrast those two charts. In the systematic, explicit instruction with cumulative practice, there were no gaps in the instruction, so there were no gaps in my students' knowledge. When we look at the guided reading instruction, the random acts of literacy I was committing, you'll be able to see, of course, my students had gaps in their knowledge. It was because I wasn't providing instruction that would make sure to fill all of those in systematically. I ended up doing a quick quiz on my students, comparing my guided reading students to the students who were receiving systematic instruction. And I realized that the students receiving systematic instruction were retaining far more words than those who were in guided reading. So I needed to switch practice. And I did. So it took me a little while to realize that the student data that I had did not indicate the need for scattershot instruction. If anything, it showed me that the vast majority of students I was serving needed systematic, explicit, cumulative instruction. So I shifted gears with my instruction, and so did the other first grade teachers. We did it about mid-year in my first year at this school. And so our data shifted. Students came in to us only 8% at benchmark, on watch, just 5% at that tipping point. In need of intervention, well, 28% needed intervention, but almost 60% of them needed urgent intervention. We shifted our instruction, and our data at the end of the year looked like this. We had flipped that RTI pyramid. So at or above benchmark, we were now finally getting above the 50% mark. On watch, we had another good chunk of students. Students in need of intervention had gotten down to a reasonable-ish percentage mark. And what we realized was we only wished we had made this change sooner. We wish we hadn't spent so much time trying to wade our way through the balanced literacy instruction that we had been working with. Wow, so to see the comparison and what it means for students was intense. When we look back at these two different kinds of lessons, in lesson one, what I walked you through was guided reading instruction. So this did include phonics instruction. It was there. There was some attention to phonemic awareness, but all of this instruction was based on the belief that reading is a visual process. So the explanations given to students were things like, add an E to the end of that word so that it looks right. Or does the word that you wrote look right? Or check the book. The word that you said, does that look right? So much emphasis was on the visual process of reading. And that's because guided reading is based on a faulty belief that reading is a visual process. It misunderstands the role of context in skilled reading. So guided reading sees context as one of the things that students can use in order to not decode the words. Guided reading depends heavily on book introductions. That's because it misunderstands the role of meaning in skilled reading. So in guided reading, The belief is that meaning can be used to help students recognize words in the book, instead of realizing the whole point of decoding is to get meaning from the text. We want to be able to read books we have never before seen. We want to make sure that we can read books without an adult having to explain what the whole book is about and give us these picture walks and tell us the words in the book before we ever start reading them. Guided reading assumes that it's okay for readers to compensate for a lack of systematic phonics by guessing words, using meaning, and using context. So what happens is that students become dependent on memorization. They become dependent on scaffolds in the text and on teacher prompting. And for some students, despite the instruction that they receive, they come to realize that the words on the page are their best bet for being able to read the story. And they'll naturally kind of shift their self away from the prompts of looking at the picture or trying to get a running start through a sentence to be able to guess what the word might be. Some students will actually phase away the unhelpful prompts. But for other students, the students for whom decoding comes with greater difficulty, those are the students who lean more heavily on the crutches of meaning and structure in order to avoid having to do the challenging work of decoding sounding out words. So one of the things that I've come to realize is that the guided reading instruction that I was providing, it's very much like putting training wheels on a bike. So what will happen is some kids can learn how to ride a bike that way, right? They just eventually start using the training wheels less, and they get to the point where they become skilled bike riders. And maybe that happened for adults too, right? Like I learned how to ride a bike with training wheels. The catch is for other students, if they have that bike with training wheels, they lean really heavily to the left side and really heavily to the right side. And they kind of have fun tilting from side to side. They're trying to go really fast, and they're using the crutches that were provided to them with a lot of gusto. They're invested in their training wheels. So then when we try to take the training wheels aside, when we try to bump them up levels of books, for example, what happens is those scaffolds they've been counting on, they're not there anymore. And so students don't actually have any way of compensating. So to continue with a bike analogy, they don't have the core strength necessary and the balance necessary. They're not good at attending to the road right in front of them, trying to watch the spot in front of them to continue trying to ride straight. Instead, they've been so distracted by the training wheels on either side that when it gets to the time that those scaffolds need to be pulled away, they really struggle. And so what I realized is that I had been providing instruction that was fun for me. The kids seemed to really enjoy it at the time. But in the end, I was doing a disservice to them. And what was happening was we were wasting time. They were going to be on track to leave first grade, like most of the other students at my school, unable to attend to the words on the page. So I'm really grateful to have switched approaches. It took me a little while to just let go of the guided reading instruction and to fully commit to providing systematic, explicit, sequential instruction with cumulative practice. But I did. I got fully invested and excited about structured phonics. Providing explicit instruction in the sounds of our language and how the letters represent those sounds. I had to learn a lot about our English language in order to do this. I had to learn how to more clearly pronounce words. I had to learn how the 26 letters of our language represent the 43 or 44 phonemes in our spoken language. But what was really neat was that I realized why I was teaching phonemic awareness and phonics. I was teaching it for the purposes of reading. And I realized that prior to this, as a balanced literacy teacher, I was doing stuff with phonics, but I was never really clear that it is how we read by attending to the letters on the page. I was providing in a more structured approach, phonics instruction that made logical sense. There was a scope and sequence in which concepts were introduced from simpler to more complex. And all of the instruction that I was providing was applied to connected text and to writing. What was really interesting to me was to see the shift in how we were thinking about the readers and their approach to unfamiliar words. So students with this approach would come to an unfamiliar word and immediately try to sound it out. And they were given text that allowed them to be successful with that strategy. This was the strategy that would work for them throughout the grades. And what was helpful to me as I was making this instructional shift was to think back to the experience I had had as a fourth grade teacher, because I had had students who would come to me and they would read, and when they got to an unfamiliar word, they would guess a word that kind of looked like that, or guess a word that made sense in the context of that particular sentence. What became clear to me is that those students who were struggling, they were struggling and they were using strategies that as a first grade teacher, I had been explicitly telling kids to use. So as a fourth grade teacher, I had been recognizing, no, this is a problem. It's a problem that our struggling readers are encountering. They are relying on strategies that are failing them. But I had never thought to turn to my primary grade colleagues and say, what do you guys know about how to address this problem? I think that if I had done that, I would have found out that we had a lot of talking to do. We could have looked at the curriculum and realized, students had actually been explicitly taught to do these things that were failing them later in the grades. I learned a lot about the concept of orthographic mapping, which was new to me. What I had been doing before was hoping kids would just memorize or magically recognize a word, instead of realizing that what I was trying to do was have them become really efficient in sounding out words so that eventually they could independently do it without the support of a teacher, and then be able to do it automatically and confidently. And then they would instantaneously recognize the words. So what I've kind of come down to are some simple, quick tips for what to look for in curricula. I know when I'm given a new program, immediately look to the front of the program where what's called the front matter exists. And what I check for is the explanation by the curriculum developers for how skilled reading develops and how reading works. So what I'm looking for is, are they explaining the concept of orthographic mapping and how students learn to recognize words? Do they explain how the letters that we have in our language connect to the spelling sounds and why we are teaching students that the code of English is logical? Or is the program presenting reading as a process of orchestrating meaning and syntax and visuals? Another thing that I look for in curriculum is to make sure that there's a clear scope and sequence for instruction, including for phonological awareness activities and phonics. I want to make sure that the instruction is providing solid, clear directions and simpler concepts before moving on to more complex ones. So for example, in guided reading, I had been teaching students that A can have the A sound or the A sound. C can have the K sound or S sound. And kids would have to memorize all of these possibilities and then try to figure out which one would make sense in the particular word we were working with, instead of realizing I could teach them the more reliable ones first and phase in the rarer ones. Another thing that's really important is to make sure that all of the foundational skills instruction is being taught for the purposes of reading and writing, that students actually get to apply this to text and to their own writing. I also now look for progress monitoring, making sure that the skills are taught to mastery so that I have the data that I need in order to know whether or not my instruction has been effective. And really, in order to fill in all of the gaps, it's the ongoing review and the cumulative practice. So making sure that students aren't just encountering something in a lesson here or there, but they're actually getting the opportunity to build confidence because they're successful, seeing the same things over and over again, developing automaticity, getting to the point of mastery, and then we can phase that practice out of our instruction. So I would love to have the opportunity to answer some questions if there are some. We can do them now, but you can also always reach out to me on social media or via email to kind of talk through some of the instructional shifts that you might be encountering yourself or trying to help guide other teachers through.
That was excellent, Margaret. I know that I was really inspired, and I'm sure that a lot of our attendees were as well. We do have a couple questions, and I would encourage people to keep putting them into the Q&A. One of the questions that came across is the programs that you used in these different lessons. Do you care to share the specifics of those programs?
Am I allowed? I'm happy to if I'm allowed. Yeah, I was teaching LLI. That was the guided reading program that I was teaching, and I was teaching SIPS, which is the structured approach.
Okay, great. I guess another question that's come up, in addition to the high quality curricula, what else do teachers need in order to teach reading well?
Yeah, so it's kind of a two-pronged approach, right? So if you're given curricula and you look at it and you're like, okay, I'll do what they're asking me to do, and you're doing it at first just by following the directions that are there, you can get some pretty decent instruction, right? And you'll notice that a good number of your students are doing really well. But there'll always be that percentage of students where you're like, it's just not clicking right. Like, what's going on for this particular student? Like, what do I need to do? And if we don't know why our curriculum is written the way that it's written, what can happen is we start pulling in things from other sources or trying other things. And if we're doing it in the dark, we're less likely to be able to reach those students for whom reading isn't coming easily. So in addition to high quality materials, what we really need is high quality professional development on how skilled reading develops and what effective instruction looks like and why. So then we can look at our curriculum if students are struggling and see like, oh, it's this part of the lesson that I need to fine tune a little bit. I got a little sloppy with this instructional routine, or I've been cutting a corner here, and this is how it's impacting my students' learning. Or we might be able to look at the program and be like, actually, I'm noticing there's not enough practice in this component. There's not enough fluency practice, for example, for my students. And I know why that's important to developing skilled readers. I'm going to increase the amount of time that my students get with decodable text practicing. So what I mean in sum is to say that we need high quality curriculum, but we need to know how and why it works or how and why it won't work. And in order to do that, we need high quality professional development, understanding reading and how reading develops.
Great, thank you. Another question that's come in, do you have advice for middle school teachers or English learner teachers?
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting, so right now you can see I'm at school. I'm a literacy coach in a TK to 6 school. And one of the things that's been really interesting is we've been collecting data on our 6th graders. And what we're noticing is that the skill gaps they have, it's the same as all the other grades. So we can go through, I'm new to my school. We're collecting data. I don't know the students. I'm new here and I'm finding out about 500 students, and the vast majority of them are having issues with vowels. They're having issues with blending. They are definitely having issues with being able to recognize words automatically, which is resulting in fluency issues. And at the middle school level, or for our 6th graders, a lot of teachers can think, well, it's a reading comprehension issue. They're struggling to comprehend the text, without realizing like, hey, we're giving them grade level text to read and asking them to read it silently. And we haven't realized that they're actually struggling with the words that are on the page. So I think one of the things that's most helpful for middle school teachers is to realize that the instruction that's happening in high quality programs for primary grade students, you're looking for that for middle school, but without the cutesy stuff. Like, we don't want to give kids silly decodable books that make them feel like we're not respectful of their age. We want to make sure that we're giving them decodable texts that are intended for adolescent readers, to make sure that they're high-low books, high interest, with low requirements for decoding, in order for students to be able to get invested in doing the work and to start feeling successful. For teachers who are working with English language learners, I think one of the things that's really important is to realize that if we think about Scarborough's rope, we have the language comprehension strand. We also have the foundational or word recognition strand. Students need to be skilled in both. So we can't just wait for students to become fluent in English before we teach them how the English code works. They need to have high quality phonics instruction in addition to really robust oral language development. And then as they're becoming more skilled, they can bring those together as Scarborough's rope becomes more interwoven.
Great. I guess what would you say or recommend to teachers if they find themselves in a balanced literacy district? Like, where should they start? What conversations should they begin having?
Well, it's funny that you asked that because that's purposely what I do. So I just moved into a new school as a literacy coach in a balanced literacy district. And the very first thing that I try to do is to focus on the student. So what do we know about our kids? Let's gather the data. What are their skills? What are the weaknesses that we're noticing? How do the weaknesses that we're noticing in our students' reading, how do they connect to the curriculum that we're using? What do we notice about the program and the instruction we're providing? And then what do we need to know in order to be able to fix these problems? So what do we need to know about phonics to teach our kids better? What do we need to know about explicit vocabulary instruction in order to teach our kids better? I feel like if we come in as if this is a battle and we are two sides, the balanced literacy side and the science of reading side, having a war of some sort, we don't gain any traction and we don't help very many teachers and students. But if we come at it as we're all here trying to help our kids, we need to figure out how we can best serve them. So we need to know them really well. We need to know our instruction really well, and we need to know what gaps there are so that we can start filling them in and our kids can start doing better. I think another thing too is to get a proof point. So make sure that you have some students that you're working with who are doing so well that other teachers are wondering, what are you doing and how can I do that for my kids? So that you're able to start embedding in some PD and some highly effective strategies from the get-go.
That all makes a lot of sense. I guess another question that's come up, what role did your administration play in your shift in instruction aligned with science?
Okay, so I've been at a variety of different schools and a bunch of different roles. So I have been an interventionist, which is the work that I was just talking about in this presentation. I've been a literacy coach, site-based, district-based literacy coach, and classroom teacher. And in each one of those roles and in each of the different schools that I've been in, I had a very different relationship with the administration. So in some instances, I've had principals, one of them who's amazing was like, I don't know, but you're asking good questions. What PD can I pay for you to go to? Or do you need a coach to come in? Can you find a coach and tell me how to make arrangements with them so that I can get you the support that you need? So that was one way of helping. It was just purely facilitation. Another thing that has happened is I've had principals who have said, like, what structures do I need to set up so that you can be successful with your job? And I'd say, okay, we need a designated block devoted to reading instruction. We need to have some agreements on curriculum. Here's what my suggestions are. And we would just kind of strategize together about what the best plan was. But right now, I'm actually in an environment that is, I feel like, one of the best I've ever been in, where I'm working with administration that really want to know the instruction. So my principal has been teaching in second grade for the past week, teaching the foundational skills program that the teachers are teaching in order to learn what is it like to learn how to do this instruction? What support do I need from the coach? What tips and tricks make it so that this instruction gets better fast? And one of the things I really love that my principal is doing is being transparent about that learning, being humble about it and explaining, like, at first this seemed like a really daunting task, but this is what I've done to kind of work through it. It's getting better for me. Here are some things that are working and why. And then this is how I'm using our literacy coach in order to be able to improve. So this kind of feels like heaven to me, and that we're actually leading by example.
That's excellent. It's great that you've had such a varied experience. Another question that's come up, what assessments do you use to gather data? It seems like data has been a really critical component in your kind of aha moment.
Totally, absolutely. So what's interesting, I've used quite a few universal screeners just because of the different places I've been. So I've used Star Early Literacy, I've used iReady, used Dibbles. So having the universal screener is really important so that you're able to see the trajectory of students. So are they on track to reading success at the end of this year and to comprehension in third grade? Or are we noticing that we need to change our instruction, intensify it to change their trajectory and get them on track? So that screening data is really important. In addition to that, we really need the diagnostic data to understand, well, why? So my personal favorite is Dibbles. I love it because it takes 5 minutes. It's 5 1-minute time tests, and you get a whole lot of information about it. You get that composite score that will tell you the trajectory the child's on. You'll also be able to find out what area students are struggling with. So is it with the ability to sound out unfamiliar words? You'll find that out from the nonsense word reading fluency. Is it that students are struggling to be able to blend and segment words? You'll find that from the phoneme segmentation task, for example. So I like Dibbles as the starting place. It's free, it's quick, you get some good data. And then from that, I've always needed to provide some diagnostic assessments. So I'll do the placement test for the program that I use, which is SIPS. That will tell me where in the scope and sequence of the program students need to be placed. And then I can group students according to their instructional needs based on that data. And then we'll do some progress monitoring, either with listening to them read the decodable text, or if they're no longer in need of decodable text, I'll do the oral reading fluency passages from Dibbles every so often to be able to make sure they're on track with their reading fluency. So I think the answer when it comes to data is that it's this difficult balance of making sure that you're not spending a huge amount of time collecting the data. The amount of time you spend collecting the data actually needs to be in line with how useful it is. So when I've used some programs with a lot of testing in it, I'll realize I'm spending 145 minutes doing data collection. And in the end, I didn't get anything other than like, this kid is or isn't on track. And that basically confirmed what I already knew. So that's really important. The second thing that's really important when it comes to data is monitoring the trajectory of students. So as a literacy coach, one of the things that I do is I look at the data for students who have been at the school for all their years of schooling and see how they're doing and try to understand a little bit more about why. So for example, I'll look and see students who are in 5th or 6th grade, all their scores from previous years, the teachers that they've had, some things that I need to know about them. And I use that as a lens for walking into classrooms for my observations, just keeping in mind what's going on. And that informs my coaching as well, and our conversations at leadership level.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have time just for one more question. How have parents reacted to what you have done, particularly if maybe they were used to getting, say, a level for their child, or what has been their reaction to some of the changes you've implemented?
So that's really interesting. I feel like one thing that has happened is that a lot of parents have been really curious about what instruction should look like. So I've had a lot of parents come to me and say, like, I want to know if my child's teacher is getting reading right. Like, what do I need to ask in a parent-teacher conference? Or if I go in and observe, what do I need to look for? So there's definitely the camp of parents who are trying to figure out, like, they know that this debate about reading is continuing to happen in the year 2021, 22. It looks like we're still on track to be discussing balanced literacy versus evidence-based approaches. So there's one camp of parents who are trying to figure out, like, how do I ensure that my child is getting the kind of instruction that will be most helpful for all kids. Then there's the other situation of families that know that their kids haven't been served well. They know that their kids aren't reading well. And they're coming and they're asking questions like, what's gone wrong and what do I have to do to try to fix this as a parent? I have had parents who have said, like, I want to know if my kid's on track. I was told last year that my child was reading at a level E. What level is he reading at now? And for that, I've always tried to just transition them to the other method of data collection that we're using. So for example, I would transition them to looking at the composite score in DIBELS to be able to say, according to this valid, predictive, reliable data, what we can see is your child is on track or not to be able to reach benchmark at the end of the year. Here are the things that we're doing to find out why that's the case. So then I share the diagnostic assessments. And here's the instruction that we're providing in order to treat the diagnosis that we've made. And what I found is that parents are so grateful to be treated like thoughtful, smart, engaged adults who care, rather than just being told your child is at a level E and what comes next? F. So I've actually found parents to be really thankful for getting more information about their kid and learning more about what they can do to support their kid while their child is reading as well.
Wow, that was great. Thank you so much, Margaret. We really appreciate it for sharing your insightful research and experience with everyone here today in Connecticut. Up next, we have, oops, sorry, one second. All right. Up next, we are excited to share some important information about structured literacy tools that can help your teachers successfully implement the science of reading into their classrooms. Super Kids Reading offers a range of products for kindergarten through second grade that are based in the science of reading and help support teachers with systematic and explicit reading instruction. The Super Kids Core is a comprehensive program that tightly integrates all aspects of language and arts and about 90 to 120 minutes of daily instruction. The Super Kids Foundational Skills Kit can be used alongside any core program to enhance phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency in about 30 to 40 minutes of daily instruction. And our new Super Kids Phonological and Phonemic Awareness Kit is designed for 10 to 12 minutes of daily instruction that can be used for tiers 1, 2, and 3. It is now my honor to introduce our next speaker, Emily Larson. Emily has been in education for over 15 years as a primary teacher, a differentiation coordinator, a reading and writing tutor, a literacy trainer and coach. And Emily holds a master's degree in educational administration and endorsements in literacy, gifted education and music theater. Thank you, Emily, for helping us see how the wonderful science of reading information being shared today can be translated into joyful and seamless classroom instruction through Super Kids.
Thank you so much, Steve. And Margaret, too, I really enjoyed everything that you shared today, and I'm thrilled to be with all of you. As Steve said, my name is Emily Larson. I'm a regional literacy coach with Super Kids, and I'm coming to you from just outside of Chicago. And I'm delighted to share with you a little bit about the Super Kids reading program today. And as Steve mentioned, there are several different pieces of the program. I'm going to be focusing on the core program today, which is really the piece that lets us take everything that we know about the science of reading and connect that in a seamless way to really successful classroom instruction. So when we think about our students, as a former kindergarten teacher myself, here is a typical class of 24 little kindergartners, and they come to school and they are shiny and they are happy and they're excited. And so often when you ask a kindergartner what they want to learn in kindergarten, they immediately come back with, I want to learn to read. Well, unfortunately, the grim statistic is by the time those little kindergartners get to fourth grade, 2/3 of them are not proficient. And this is really a snapshot of reading achievement in the US, though it is bleak. But to me as an educator, it's truly a call to action. So what can we do differently so that all of those shiny, happy-faced kindergartners become proficient readers by the time they're in third grade? Not to be all gloom and doom here, but less than half of our nation's high school students meet the benchmark level in reading on the ACT. So again, what can we do differently? We cannot keep doing what we've been doing, especially in light of all that we've learned in the last several years, many years, 10, 20, almost 30 years, about the science of reading and what happens in a child's brain as they become a reader. So what do we do with the Super Kids program? We work to build success, inspire our students, and extend their learning. How do we build success? Well, we've aligned our Super Kids program to brain research. We use research-proven instruction, and we really work to build a solid literacy foundation. What I should mention is the Super Kids program is a K-2 program. So we are truly making ourselves available to lay the foundation for our youngest readers and to ensure that they have the skills in place that they can build upon throughout their lives in their reading careers so they can really realize the American dream. We have lots of efficacy studies on our website at Zaner Bloser. So if you are a research-minded person and you want to take a peek at those, please do. So when we think about reading and what happens inside a child's brain as they become a reader, what does the brain actually have to do? So we know we have these processors in our brains. We have the orthographic processor, we have the phonological processor, and then that sound symbol connection area in the middle part of the brain where the magic really happens, where we're connecting the letters to the sounds. So we are literally, as primary educators, helping our students to build the neural circuitry in their brains. And we can do this with repetition, we can do this, and we can even deepen and strengthen those neural pathways in our students' brains if we really follow the scientifically proven predictable progression of skills that's needed to become a reader. So let's talk a little bit about this progression of skills. So it's twofold. We know that we need to work with our beginning readers and emergent readers on word recognition and simultaneously language comprehension. So when we think about word recognition, we start with phoneme awareness and work our way to letter recognition, letter naming, and letter formation. Over time, we are able to layer on letter sound association, and then we work with our students to master the skill of blending, beginning with 2 sounds, then 3 sounds, and so on. Blending will give way to decoding, and we need to ensure that we're teaching decoding and encoding simultaneously because it's really the synergy of the two that allow our students to become readers and writers. Once we've gotten pretty solid in our word recognition skills, we can start introducing memory words or sight words, if you will, those phonetically irregular words. We want our students to become comfortable with 26 letters and 26 sounds, and then obviously adding the additional sounds in the long vowels over time. But we want them to be really proficient and fluent in blending and decoding before we start throwing a whole bunch of memory words or sight words at them where we say, okay, we taught you all those rules, but now here's a whole bunch of words that don't follow those rules. We want to really teach our students to default to decoding because we know that decoding is a sustainable reading strategy. It's the one that we all use as adults as well. Now, at the same time that we're working on word recognition, we're also working with our students on language comprehension. And we say language comprehension because initially it's not reading comprehension. A child cannot comprehend what they are reading themselves until they have gotten to the place of automaticity and fluency with their own reading. So on the interim, we work to develop our students' oral language, develop their vocabulary, and we really focus on listening comprehension, which will eventually help with their own reading comprehension. And it's the synergy of automaticity and strategic thinking that gives way to fluency for our young readers. Once our readers are fluent, they will be able to comprehend the text that they themselves read. So that's really the progression of skills that needs to be followed to help our students unlock the alphabetic code and become readers. Couple that science with these characters, and you have got a recipe for success. These are the Super Kids characters, and they are beloved by all of our kindergarten, first, and second graders that have the privilege of working with this program. These characters are the heart and soul of the program. They are introduced to the students in kindergarten, and these exact characters grow up right alongside our students from kindergarten to first grade to second grade. They grow and change just as our students do. They experience different things just as our students do. So it's really exciting to see our young readers connect with these characters that they are reading about. So much so that oftentimes our emergent readers don't even realize how hard they're working to learn to read because they're so excited to learn more about their Super Kids friends. Just a little bit of background on these characters. They each have their own set of likes and dislikes, strengths and weaknesses, all of those things that make them unique and special. They're introduced one by one in kindergarten, and each character represents one letter and one sound, and that's the beginning letter and sound of that character's name. So just for a frame of reference, this very first character with the chef's hat on, her name is Cass. And Cass represents the letter C and the K sound. Cass loves to cook with her cat Coconut. They make casserole concoctions and cakes. Each one of these characters, as I said, represents the beginning letter and sound of their name. And they also have a special song that is a mnemonic device for kids as they learn and familiarize themselves with that letter and sound in kindergarten. So as a way to build a staircase to complexity, the Super Kids program really does a beautiful job of building across the grade levels too. So we start in kindergarten meeting those characters during first semester. Once we know all of the characters, we start to read stories about the club that they form with one another. As we advance into first grade, we read about those same characters in the adventures that they're having as they get a little bit older and they can understand and appreciate more of life. Finally, in second grade, we move with those characters where the majority of their stories take place in their second grade classroom. And there's 2 semesters of instruction in second grade as well. And we see these Super Kids characters maturing and growing just as we see our own students maturing and growing. I'm going to show you a very brief instructional plan for each of the grade levels so you get an idea of some of the materials that we use in the Super Kids program to really create this seamless approach to teaching students reading in a very aligned way to the science of reading. So in kindergarten, we have our student books, which is where the kiddos are introduced to skills and have an opportunity to practice skills. In the reading strand of our instructional plan in kindergarten, we read only decodable text. Some of those decodable stories are found in our student books. Some of those decodable stories are found in our differentiated library books. So these library books are not leveled, for example, like Fontes and Pinnell, but rather they're differentiated by the amount of text on the page, the complexity of the text, the length of the sentences, the how many syllables are in the words. So for each unit of instruction, there are 3 library books, but each library book that's being introduced only contains the letters and sounds that have been explicitly taught to that point in the school year. So all of the books for each unit contain the same letters and sounds, but they're differentiated again by the amount of text and the complexity of the text. The kindergarten teacher shares a digital read aloud called a Super Smart, and this is an interactive read aloud that she shares on her smartboard. And it's the nonfiction balance to what's happening in the fictional world of the Super Kids. So the theme of the Super Smart ties to what's happening in the world of the Super Kids. In addition, during second semester, the kindergartners get their own informational textbooks that they read in small group with their teacher. The writing program builds at a slow, steady pace, very developmentally appropriate from kinder to first to second, really allowing us to give our students a deep, rich understanding of a variety of genres, such as narrative, informative, explanatory, and opinion pieces. When I talk about this explicit systematic instruction, I can give you some really great examples in kindergarten. So beginning of kindergarten, here we're working with the letter S, which is represented by our super kid named Sal. And Sal loves to speak Spanish and play sports, especially sports that begin with S, like skiing and skating and stickball. So on this particular page, our kindergartners are connecting the letter S to things in the picture that begin with the sound. While some of our students will find the skateboard, the sandwich, some of the boy over here skipping rope. We also want our students, we draw their attention to the more complex vocabulary, like the man in the window who is serenading, and the mother on the stair who is scolding. So there's a lot of depth to each one of the assignments in order to make sure that every kindergartner is getting what they need. Now we're pairing these words in this picture with the introduction of verbs as well. Sal loves sports, so we talk about action and action verbs. So many of the items that the kids are going to unpack in this picture are action words as well. We work on phonemic awareness and letter sound association by talking about the pictures here, for example, where Sal is doing all of these different activities that begin with S, and then we have the children identify and begin to trace the uppercase and lowercase s. We, of course, pair that with introducing the formation for uppercase and lowercase s. So they're getting this really deep, rich understanding, mile deep, inch wide understanding of every letter and sound. We're always blending the new letters and sounds in every possible formation, a beginning, a medial, and an ending sound. And that blending, coupled with the encoding practice that we do daily during our daily routine, really drives our students to become proficient decoders. So this is a really exciting and explicit approach to teaching reading, following the science of reading. This is one of the very first stories that the children read in kindergarten Super Kids. At this point, we have only introduced 6 letters and sounds, and it's those that you see on the screen, C, O, G, A, D, and S. We introduced those 6 first. Number 1, we want to get some vowels on the scene so that we can do some blending. Number 2, those 6 letters, when they're formed, you begin at the 2 o'clock position and you move in a counterclockwise motion. So we're grouping them by letter formation, which again helps to create those neural pathways in our students' brains. Now I know that this story really doesn't look like much. It's very simple, but it does have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it does have a problem and a solution. And the author wrote this story using only the 6 letters and sounds that had been taught to this point in the school year, which is very early. And let me tell you, the kindergartners are extremely proud of this story. When they get to bring their student books home, they read it to anybody and everybody that will listen. Now, over the next several weeks, we introduce several more letters and sounds. And once we have 13 letters and sounds in our pool of working knowledge and the memory word the has been explicitly taught, we're reading text that looks like this. And we call it cumulatively decodable just for the simple fact that we never ever put a letter or sound in front of our students that has not been explicitly taught. And there's a lesson to text match, and that's a really critical component of the Super Kids program and of successfully teaching children to learn to read. Now, I love this text because as you look at it, the gull adds fluff, the gull sits still, the gulls fuss. What children do when they read, or when they've used different reading resources in the past, they often look at the picture, they think about pattern text, they look for a pattern in the text, and then they look at the picture to confirm what has changed in the text. And they just plug in whatever they notice. This cumulatively decodable text is different in that they must decode and get that text off the page, but then they can look at the picture to confirm what they've read. That picture isn't going to tell them what word to insert. For example, this sweet picture, they aren't going to know that that says the gull's fuss just from the picture, but they will read the gull's fuss using their blending and decoding skills that we have been working on systematically and explicitly to this point. And then they can look at that picture and infer, what do we mean by fuss? What does fuss mean in this situation? By the end of kindergarten, our students are reading books that look like this. This is called The Gifts, and this is about one of the Super Kids characters and gifts that her grandfather sends her from his travels around the world. So because we take this very intentional, slow, steady climb in kinder, we have great success by the end of kindergarten, and our students are successfully and easily reading this cumulatively decodable text. These super smarts that I mentioned earlier are the digital interactive read alouds that the teacher shares, and they really balance the nonfiction world of the Super Kids. So when the children are learning about certain things in the life and time of the Super Kids, we have the nonfiction balance in the Super Smarts that the teacher is sharing. This is one of our studies that you can also find on our website, the Stanford Early School Achievement Test, and we looked at 3,200 students. So we broke them up into subcategories. In the fall, before they began the Super Kids program, this is where they fell in reference to the national norm on the Stanford Early School Achievement Test. By the end of the year, after just 1 year of using the Super Kids program, every subcategory of students was beyond the national norm. So not only did they make great gains in every category, but every category was able to achieve above the national norm. Let's look at these Super Kids friends again. I mentioned Cass earlier and all of her likes and dislikes having to do with that letter C and the K sound. I talked a little bit about Sal. Here's Doc. Doc loves to dibble and dabble and fix broken toys. Down in the bottom, you see our friends Tic Tac and Tock, and they are known for being triple trouble. There's no stone left unturned in the Super Kids program. As we move into first grade, I think what you'll see is they look a little bit older and a little bit wiser, just like our first graders do. Same with second grade. Our Super Kids are growing up right before our eyes. And there's something special and unique that's exciting for each grade level. In second grade, we get a new character, and it's the Super Kids classroom teacher. Her name is Miss Blossom. And the kids really love welcoming this new teacher and new character into their world of Super Kids. So how do we extend our student learning? We give a clear, flexible instructional path. We use it is a comprehensive standalone English language arts program, so there's no need for any supplemental materials. We've even included cross-curricular connections. We take a very deliberate text approach using that cumulatively decodable text, and we increase that text complexity over time, eventually moving them to uncontrolled text in second grade. We know as educators, a deficiency in any one of the language arts component skills can affect the development of the other language arts skills. So using a core program like Super Kids, where all of the language arts components are seamlessly integrated, really allows us to get to this point with our students where we're building their whole language arts foundation and setting them up for success. Let's take a peek at the first grade instructional plan. There's a lot of consistency between the grade levels. In first grade, we are working in a word workbook where we introduce and practice skills. We're reading decodable stories in our hardcover reader, as well as in our differentiated library books, which are a balance of fiction and nonfiction. In first grade, we also have digital read alouds that tie to the life and times of the Super Kids and an informational text magazine. And we carry on with our seamlessly integrated writing instruction. I want to show you an example in first grade of what I mean by integration. So here's a first grade lesson where the children are reading a story about their Super Kids friends. They have a rainy day. So instead of playing outside, the Super Kids friends start to come up with some ideas of things that they can do on a rainy day. So these are their rainy day projects. So the Super Kids are literally writing down ideas, explaining what supplies they need, and then step by step explaining what to do to enjoy this fun activity on a rainy day. Well, lo and behold, that very same day, speaking of explicit instruction and systematic, that very same day, the first graders in their writing lesson with their teacher, they are going to be writing an explanatory piece too, telling about something that they know how to do, listing out what is needed for the activity, and then step by step explaining what needs to be done. So what your actual first graders are experiencing is mirroring what the Super Kids are doing, writing their own explanatory stories. Same with the word workbook. And I know as an early early in my teaching career, this is what I was missing. There was no connectivity between the writing program I taught, the reading program I taught, the phonics program I taught. We used all different programs, and it was very much a hodgepodge. I was missing the connectivity, and so were my students. Here's an example of what I mean by that connectivity. So in the word workbook, we're introducing contractions, and we're talking about contractions, what they are, defining them, and practicing them. Well, that same week on our spelling test, we are learning contractions for our spelling test. So there's that great connective piece, and we're going to be tested on different contractions. Then in our reader, we're reading these wonderful stories about our Super Kids friends, and wouldn't you know, the stories this particular week are full of contractions. So the students really begin to see how all of these language arts component skills can be tied together. Here's the beautiful first grade informational text magazine, where we're doing not only connecting to the fictional world of the Super Kids, but we're really explicitly teaching comprehension, and we're working on some rich cross-curricular connections. Our differentiated readers, just like I mentioned in first grade, they all contain the same letters and sounds, but they're a variety of differentiated reading experiences based on the complexity of the text. The super smarts, just like in kindergarten, are the digital read alouds that tie to what's happening in the fictional world of the Super Kids. In first and second grade, we use these beautiful words to know cards where we've paired a photograph with a tier 2 vocabulary word that's pulled right out of the stories that they're reading. Jumping into second grade now, let's look at what we have for word work and reading. In second grade, we are introducing and practicing our skills in our word workbook, and we are working on fluency in our decodable reader. Now, second grade is different in that the only cumulatively decodable piece is the reader. Because of the work we've done in K and 1, by second grade, we are able to blow the doors off of reading. And this is so exciting for our Super Kids schools. We use a pairing of Super Magazine, which is complex grade level text, informational text, and narratives. We have our students every other unit participate in what we call book club, which is small group reading with their teacher, and they get a chance to read 8 novels over the course of second grade from a variety of genres and many different prolific authors. Many of them are from a series to pique their interest, so they keep reading from that series long after second grade is over. Paired with each novel that they read, they get a mini book talk journal, and this is their space to respond to their reading, cite text evidence, offer an opinion about what they've read, and even rate the book. So these book talk journals are really a wonderful way for our students to not only appreciate the novels that they're reading and this beautiful authentic literature that they're reading, but it also is really empowering to them. And it teaches them why we as adults read and the pleasure that you can get from reading and all that it can do to enrich your life. This is a peek into the second grade Super Magazine. So again, we've now lifted those decodable controls, and you can see that there's a lot of text, and it's rich and it's complex and it's engaging for our students. And it ties to all sorts of different subject areas: science, history, health, tons of different subject areas. And it really helps our students to learn to navigate informational text. So we use this joyful and engaging text to build this staircase of complexity from kindergarten to first grade to second grade. And the children are so motivated by reading about their Super Kids friends and making the connections between the fictional and nonfiction world of the stories that they are reading with their teacher. So using this cumulatively decodable text and texts that are truly worth reading, our students become not only fantastic readers, but also brilliant writers. Our writing program follows the same 3-step process for kinder, first, and second. We always begin with teacher instruction and modeling, then supporting our students with practice and application, and allowing them to share. So really, that gradual release of responsibility, taking them through the writing process. We are so proud at Super Kids of some of the wonderful endorsements we have received over the years. We are proud of our program. We are proud of its success in all of the schools that we have the privilege of partnering with. And here's just a couple of the endorsements that we've received regarding our program and its connection to the science of reading. Unfortunately, my time with you is just about over, but I have so enjoyed having the opportunity to share with you about the Super Kids program. My contact information is there. If you have any questions, you are very welcome to email me. I think we are at time. I don't know if there is a chance. Let me just look at the chat here to see if there are any questions. I don't see anything that has popped up, or maybe they were answered, which is fabulous. So I'm going to take this opportunity to say, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for having me, and take care.
Thank you so much, Emily. The presentations this morning have been so wonderful, connecting the research to practice. And we really have touched on bringing the science of reading and that defining movement to Connecticut. We're going to take just a moment and give some time for our spotlight partners before we head off to lunch.
Hello, I'm Joan Sedita, the founder of Keys to Literacy. Congratulations to the Reading League of Connecticut and its first conference. Literacy is the foundation of all learning, and here at Keys to Literacy, literacy is all we do. We specialize in developing, publishing, and delivering professional learning for all literacy topics. Our professional development is aligned to the science of reading and writing, which is why the mission of Keys to Literacy is aligned to the Reading League's conference that's focused on the science of reading findings. Keys to Literacy professional development includes training for teachers, building-based coaches, and administrators to build long-term capacity. We're based in Massachusetts, and we train teachers across the country, including in our neighboring state of Connecticut. We have multiple professional development courses for all grades that can be accessed on site and online. This includes the Key Vocabulary Routine for grades 3 to 12, the Key Comprehension Routine for 4 to 12, and Close Reading. For writing, we have Keys to Content Writing for grades 3 to 12 and Keys to Early Writing for grades K to 2. Our Keys to Beginning Reading K3 Science of Reading course covers all the components of beginning reading instruction. The full course totals 36 hours, organized into 11 modules. We have additional PD topics, including adolescent literacy, advanced word study, keys to emergent reading for pre-K, and understanding dyslexia. Contact us to learn more about our on-site and virtual live training for schools, our online courses, and professional development events that are open to the public. And please visit our website to take advantage of our large collection of free resources. Keys to Literacy is delighted to partner with the Reading League of Connecticut.
Hello, this is Dr. Gail Zuckerwise, Center Director at Lindenwood Bell Learning Processes in Darien, Connecticut. Congratulations to the Reading League for launching your new Connecticut state chapter. When we all work together towards the common goal of helping students learn to read, we can affect change. We're happy to be on board with the new movement of promoting scientific methods of instruction and look forward to contributing to the effort in a meaningful way as we introduce research that takes into account the cognitive science of reading.
Thank you to the Reading League Connecticut chapter for bringing us together to engage in thinking about the science of reading. Flyleaf Publishing is pleased to participate in this important event. Our mission at Flyleaf Publishing is to create high-quality decodable literature and evidence-aligned materials and assessments for integrated foundational skills and close reading instruction. We believe that every teacher should deliver engaging instruction that is aligned with the science of reading, and that every student deserves to be guided by such instruction to grow into a skilled reader. Our mission aligns with the science of reading, including the formula of the simple view of reading, which demonstrates that reading comprehension is the product of two component skills, decoding or foundational skills, and language comprehension or close reading skills, and Scarborough's reading rope, which illustrates how these component skills are made up of strands of subset skills, all of which need to be woven together to result in skilled reading. Our instructional materials develop these component skills in this way. Each flyleaf book becomes decodable once students have received the foundational skills instruction that has been developed for the book. Then, each book provides abundant opportunities for students to transfer their newly acquired decoding knowledge to meaningful, engaging, and complex texts. After students read, close reading instruction is delivered in the same decodable book that students can read, reread, and locate evidence in independently. The result is fully integrated instruction that addresses all of the strands on the reading rope, all in the same book. Please visit flyleafpublishing.com to learn more about our decodable literature and evidence-aligned materials and assessments. Together, we can strive to ensure that every student has the opportunity to grow into a skilled, fluent, and joyful reader.
You confirm as a panelist, not as an attendee? Can you confirm that I'm in as a panelist and not as an attendee?
Yes, you are, Cheryl.
Oh, I'm not muted. Good afternoon and welcome back. My name is Cheryl Knapp and I'm on the board of directors of the Reading League Connecticut. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our next presenter, Ernie Ortiz Jr. Ernie has worked in elementary education for 20 years as both a teacher and administrator, and is currently beginning his 5th year as the proud principal of McDonald Elementary School in Warminster, Pennsylvania. Over the years, Ernie has developed a passion for literacy. He believes that if educators learn about and rely on reading research, they can better support their students' path to reading proficiency. He is currently in the final year of a doctoral program, with his research focusing on K-2 literacy. Ernie will be sharing his journey, and especially lessons learned, in incorporating science of reading practices into the school curriculum. Please join me in welcoming him today.
So thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate the introduction. And I just want to say thank you to the Reading League Connecticut for welcoming me here today to share my story. And I see we have a great group of educators who are here and willing to participate and listen. And I'm hopeful that you find this session meaningful, enjoyable, and informative. So as Cheryl said, I am the proud principal of McDonald Elementary School, and I'm entering my 5th year. And with COVID shutdowns back in 2020, our instructional models going back and forth last year, and even still dealing with the impacts of COVID this year, it's super critical and important now more than ever that we do rely on the science of reading, evidence-aligned instruction and practices to really help support our children. So I'm going to get started. Share my screen here. Okay, so instructional leaders as agents of change, and I'm very passionate about the importance of instructional leaders being part of the process when we're making the shift to the science of reading. I can tell you that I've communicated with educators across the country where there's a spray and pray approach to in terms of making the shift, or even just becoming aware of evidence-aligned practices, whether it's a 3-day workshop and letters training, and then they'll follow up, whether it's a couple of workshops over the year, but then they'll follow through from central or building administration leadership. So I really do believe that for this shift to occur and to take hold and last, instructional leaders play a huge part in that role. So with all that being said, Cheryl already did the introduction, but I do want to add that I have had the privilege of working with the Reading League before, a group like Amplify, and also the AIMS Institute for Learning and Research. So the more that we can network and communicate with organizations that are within our infinity circle of this desire to move forward with evidence-aligned practices and research aligned with the science of reading, it just furthers everyone's development and it furthers the movement. So the goals of this presentation and what I hope that you take away from this is for an understanding of the importance of leadership in this whole process. And I'm hopeful there are a bunch of leaders here, whether it be the reading specialist types of leaders, informal leaders within the teacher ranks, building leaders, central administration leaders, your importance in advancing an awareness, the understanding, and the use of evidence-aligned reading instruction. And then you leave this session with an understanding and a motivation. That's what I'm hopeful for, to start the journey, start the change process to advance evidence-aligned reading instruction. So those are the 2 goals for this presentation. So what is the science of reading? And I've been asked this question a number of times since I've been more aware and immersing myself in the science of reading. And depending on who you ask, some people might say it's a philosophy, some people might say it's an approach. But I love this definition that's captured from a little bit of what Louisa Moats had to say and what the Reading League has to say, and how it is a body of scientifically based research. It isn't a philosophy. It isn't specifically or particularly our approach. It is a body of scientifically based research. We have evidence here to suggest what is the most effective way to go about teaching children so that they become proficient readers and writers. And then the awesome thing about this research, it isn't new research per se, because it's been around for 5 decades, and it's global in its body. And then, so we're informed of how proficient reading and writing develops. And then that information gives us the ability to diagnose and support children who are having difficulty with reading. So how we can most effectively assess and teach our children through core instruction and intervention, that's what the science of reading helps us do as educators. And so for me, that's what I share. And I'll be tactful and kind with my approach when people suggest it might be a philosophy, because it is not a philosophy. There is evidence to suggest how we should go about working with our children when it comes to reading, writing development, and how to support their deficiencies. So, importance of leadership. And this is something that I've been campaigning for, getting on my soapbox when I network with colleagues from other districts that reach out to me, whether it's locally or whether it's from further away in the state or even nationally. Central administration's role in this shift, crucial. Why is that? Well, as a building leader, I do have a level of autonomy within my building, but my building is one small piece of the bigger district. And although I was introduced as my school's journey, well, I can tell you that school journey has now become a district journey. And with the help of the central administrators in my district, with aligning professional development with our PD plan for the year, and over the last several years, having building leadership build their capacity, teachers as well, because it's been my experience, the vast professional development time is district directed. So by having central administration understand the importance of this, helps with dedicating the resources that central administration has to use to support the buildings, resources like time. So I could tell you that I'm very familiar with the win time or the intervention enrichment block time. And I'm actually very surprised to hear how many schools and districts across our country don't have that time built in their schedule. And then also just in terms of core instruction time, how little time is dedicated to reading and put forth in the daily schedule uninterrupted. And in terms of talent, acquiring the type of teachers that we need to teach reading, and also the type of specialists to help reinforce the deficiencies. And then maybe some might say more importantly, because I can tell you at the building level, our budget is very small, but the budget that the central administrators have and have the discretion to use for things like the instructional materials, really, really important. So this is where, as a system, central administration systemically can look at how they can lead this shift into the science of reading to help support building leadership. And a recent study came out by Schrader, Fox, and Moen in 2020, where they suggested strong school leadership is needed to improve services for all students. Now, how is that? Why is that? Well, strong building leadership, school leadership supports the core curriculum instruction. When the building leader or the building leadership, if there happens to be more than one building leader, when they understand what quality instruction looks like, they have a better sense of how to provide feedback, what to look for, how to, even if they're not considered the experts per se, provide constructive criticism from the outside looking in to help support the learning process. Understanding how to use data, I cannot begin to explain from personal experience how important that is, how it's impacted my career, how it's impacted my building, and now how it's continuing to impact our district. Understanding how to use your data and the programs or the systems that you have for your data, depending whether it's Ames Web or Dibbles, or maybe you're using MAP, and any combination of those services that are out there, understanding how to use that data that's given to you to help improve, strengthen that core one instruction, and then linking it into the intervention piece to extend that learning. Understanding how to how to do intervention well, very, very key. The MTSS process is something that many school districts use. If not MTSS, then a CST, Child Study Team process. And as the building leaders, we are a part of that process, at least we should be. And understanding how to be an active participant, providing knowledgeable feedback and guidance and input will only strengthen that link from core one to the intervention piece. And lastly, although it isn't as vast as the time that's controlled potentially by central administration, building level professional development, very key. I can tell you from my personal experience how we, and I say we because I'm fortunate enough to have an assistant principal to work alongside to lead our building. We plan out professional development to support and follow up our district plan. So when we go through our central administrative calendar for professional development, they create the calendar. So what we end up doing is the next year helping support what was learned throughout that previous year. Now, of course, during the school year, we'll support as well, but reinforcing it the following year has served to be really helpful in maintaining the momentum and continuing the shift. I can tell you, I just had a meeting with one of my upper elementary principals. I'm a K-5 building, if it wasn't mentioned before. So in one of my upper elementary grades, we were discussing the previous year's professional development. And my teacher was telling me it was just so much. It was a lot to really take in, and it really can be for some people. So we're working to really focus on what we believe are going to be the most important topics and concepts to hit now to continue moving forward, but always revisit as needed and with input from the teachers. So that follow-up, huge from the building level leadership. So that is why their knowledge in the science of reading, I would argue, is critical. Now, of course, teacher knowledge. And I just want to preface this by saying this slide is by no means demeaning the quality of the teachers that we have, because this is really to no fault of their own. But there's been a number of studies that have shown a lack of teacher knowledge of how reading is acquired and how to support our students who struggle with reading. For example, the first study in the bullet here by Cunningham, Perry, Stanovich, they conducted a study where they assessed teachers' actual knowledge of phonemic awareness and phonics compared to their perceived knowledge. And their actual knowledge fell short to the teacher's perceived knowledge. Two very foundational areas of reading development, phonemic awareness and phonics, to help support years of reading growth. So if teachers' actual knowledge falls short of their perceived knowledge, that's a problem. And then in terms of another study from 2008 by Spencer, Schul, Goulet, and Lee, phonemic skill levels of reading specialists and special educators were not sufficient to provide accurate phonemic awareness intervention. So let's think about that. We have teachers with a reading specialist degree or a special education background working ostensibly with our neediest students when it comes to reading. And if they have an inability to really truly understand phonemic skill levels and how that progression moves forward, it sets up for a system that's simply going to keep students from moving forward with their reading proficiency. And then lastly, 20% of pre-service teachers did not know how to support students with dyslexia. And with this growing awareness of dyslexia and how it impacts children's reading development, if we have 2 out of 10 teachers not knowing how to really support students who are struggling, that doesn't simply impact students who potentially might end up being diagnosed with dyslexia. That impacts all students who struggle with reading. And so critical points to serve as why it's really important for teachers to build this knowledge in the science of reading. So I'm hopeful that these first initial slides have really instilled why it's important for central administrators, building leadership, and our teachers to have this ability to gain the knowledge that the science of reading has to offer. Now, in terms of how my journey started, you look at it as an embracing. That's the way I look at it. I embraced the science of reading. And it was for me back in 2018 when I read Emily Hanford's Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? And focused on actually a school district that's not too far from me up north, about an hour and a half's drive, and a demographic profile which is similar to my school building, and the success that they were having. And so I listed some of the books here, and of course, the organization that I get to work with often enough, and I truly love the Reading League. They helped me jump into this vast knowledge base, and I embraced it because, quite honestly, for having been a teacher in the elementary setting for 13 years, I didn't hear about the science of reading and everything it had to offer until my second year of being a building principal. It just blows my mind. So you're looking at that's year 17 or 18 for me. And so why is that? Well, it's because we weren't exposed to it, or I wasn't, I could tell you, in my pre-service years, in my master's coursework, and it really wasn't until I started my doctoral work that I was exposed to this. So that's why it's really critically important to get this exposure out. So it started with an article of Emily Hanford's to really get me going and embracing the science of reading, and it caused a lens change. So on the left of this screen, that's what I knew. 3 cueing, I knew the animal strategies. I vividly remember telling my second grade students, skip the word, read the rest of the sentence, and see if we can figure out what that word is as a means to decode. And I don't know if you can see my little box with me using air quotes, because it really wasn't decoding, but I was using meaning to try to figure out a word that they didn't know. And also strategies like chunky monkey, where we look for smaller words inside of a bigger word, which makes total logical sense to me, or made sense to me at the time. But then to understand how that doesn't connect with, it might work for one word and then not for others, and then simply encouraging the boys and girls to use a strategy that isn't going to be very helpful. So from that side, on the left side of your screen, 3 cueing and these animal strategies and understanding, I'm taking my magnifying glass and I'm really focusing that lens on the simple view of reading, the theoretical framework by Gall and Tumner, the conceptual framework by Scarborough's reading rope of the simple view of reading. Wow, concepts I had never even heard of, but one that had been around since 1986. Are you kidding me? I never even heard of it. And then to understand Scarborough's reading rope from 2001, that's when I started teaching. I should have known about that, at least in my one of my master's programs. And so that wasn't the case. And that's what caused this whole shift of mine, changing my lens on stopping to rely on practices that weren't evidence aligned and really understanding the theoretical frameworks that support the science of reading. So reflecting back, I mentioned to you that in the 2018-2019 school year is when I was really exposed to this concept of the science of reading. And I made it a point to really understand it on my own, but that doesn't mean we just stop what we're doing and wait until we learn everything. We still had a school year to get through. And I got to say, that school year, man, we had a great school year in terms of our state assessments. Now, if you're from Pennsylvania, or if you're familiar with Pennsylvania, you should be familiar with the PSSA scores. Those are our state standards, our state assessments. And that school year, we had improvement in grades 3, 4, 5 in reading and math, highest scores and results in 5 years. And we celebrated our success. It was awesome. But then over the summer, when you have some downtime and you're really digging into your data, I had the time to reflect. And we had 62.5% of our third graders at that time who were performing at or above proficiency. Now, remember, I mentioned these were the highest results we had in 5 years. So in my mind, we celebrated success. Don't get me wrong. And I wasn't a Debbie Downer with my teachers. We were very happy, and I was very happy and proud. But But when you have a moment to sit and reflect, silently and by yourself, it started to dawn on me, everyone, that I had 4 out of 10 students who weren't performing at or above proficiency. And then looking at our longitudinal data over the years, the success wasn't sustained in grades 4 and 5. And so why is that? So again, the reality of our data, this created the sense of urgency that I had back then, and I actually still have to this day, which is why I'm here and sharing this with all of you. And you take that sense of urgency that I felt with and realizing that 4 out of 10 of my 3rd grade boys and girls were not at a proficient or above level. And then everything that was learning and reading about the science of reading, that was it. That was the tipping point for me to really push this forward with my school and my district. So how do you start? Well, you embrace the research. Again, I mentioned this earlier, the simple view of reading, the theoretical framework that although it has the word simple in it, there's nothing simplistic about understanding how reading is developed, but breaking it down very succinctly, Galen Tumner has this formula, this mathematical equation where reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension. And it's really important to understand that it's a multiplication problem. And when I work with my teachers over the years, some of them would talk about how it's an addition problem, and we would have a good discussion of why it's a multiplication problem, because if you lack anything in decoding or language comprehension, then it will absolutely impact the score for reading comprehension. And then Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, wow, that conceptual framework, which mirrors the simple view of reading, but the strands really break down what part of decoding is covered on that side of the reading rope and the intricate strands of the language comprehension side. That has really helped us with our tier 1 instruction, but more importantly, with our intervention, specifically with our friends who are struggling readers. So understanding those 2 concepts, those frameworks, has really helped support our shift and our movement. So I can't begin to emphasize enough, as building leadership who might work closely with your reading specialist, or maybe you have some literacy coaches in your district or in your building, those 2 frameworks serve as our roadmap. That's where I would start conversations centered around these 2 frameworks with regards to how reading comprehension develops. And so when working on a more building and perhaps even district level approach to starting the change process, I worked with developing a change vision. But the first thing I did before I went forward was I honored the room. In my opinion, really important to do, honor the room. Where are we and how far have we come? And so again, the success that we have had that year, the 2018-2019 year, honored the room and the good things that we were doing, because we were doing some very good things. Were there areas we can improve upon? Absolutely. And my teachers will be the first to tell you where we have improved, and clarify then how the future will be different than the past. And it all revolved around literacy instruction, which was aligned with reading research. We had, and I was guilty of this as well as a teacher, a number of practices that had no research to support it. And that was a hard pill to swallow for a lot of teachers and even some parents, but that's another story. So one of the things I'll share with you, and I'm sure when I say this, is going to resonate with a number of people in this that are in attendance with us today. The concept of looking at pictures to help support young readers' development. It seems so logical. We've heard it for many years. I did it as a teacher. My teachers were doing it. And as a building leader for the first several years, as an assistant, and then as a building principal, that's the type of instruction I was looking for when I went in and did walkthroughs or formal observations. But to understand that if we're promoting our students to take their eyes off the letters, to look at other factors that might prompt them to understand what a word is in front of them, not to understand its meaning, but to understand what those letters represent in terms of the word, that we are doing them a disservice and that there is no evidence to suggest that that's going to help them even in the medium or long term. And then empowering teachers to take action so that they can embrace change. And then super important, the trust and leadership, because this shift, as with any change process, really requires trust, because there's going to be some risk taking, there's going to be some uncomfortableness as we go through the change process. So how people accept change. Now, teachers are going to react differently. And it happened to me in my building. So I have here this bell curve where I'm going to break down how it all started at McDonald Elementary School. We had the beginning of the school year faculty meeting, State of the Union address with our data of our students that were returning in grades 1 through 5. And after that initial conversation and those initial first couple of days discussing the science of reading, getting people's awareness around this topic up, so to speak, you had the really small piece of those first teachers that were eager, the innovators, and I would even go to the early adopters. Those first two groups, those were the teachers that after we had this whole group faculty meeting where we were discussing all things literacy, that would come to me, email me, call me, reach out to me to discuss further or to ask for more articles or research that they could read, books. And so those two groups, critical. Then you have your early majority who hear what you're saying. They say, "Oh, yeah, that sounds really great. That sounds really interesting." But they're not the type that are going to line up to buy that newest cell phone, so to speak, but they see the benefits. They see the benefits. Then you have the late majority who are going to potentially cling to what they've always done because they've always done it this way, but aren't completely opposed to coming along once the early majority have already started adopting the change. The late majority will come a little bit later. Obviously, that's why they're called the late majority. And then you have the small group of educators who are the late adopters. And quite honestly, that's when you have to set clear expectations and reinforce those expectations so that there is no ambiguity. You'll have a number of late adopters in any organization. It's just the way it works. But I have to tell you, these two groups, the early adopters and the innovators, really important part of the change process. To this day, we are in year 3 of the change process, and we're still working. I got to tell you, where K1, 2 are for us at McDonald and really across our district, it's really exciting. And it's getting to the point where we're feeling really good with what we've been able to accomplish. And now we're looking to even solidify 4, 5. We're working on 3 because grade 3 serves as a very unique year in terms of what they need and the resources available to help support that need. And so the early adopters and the innovators to this day they serve as an extension of building leadership's desire and efforts to make this shift and districts' efforts. I can tell you, and I'm very proud of this, that since we started this shift, we have since hired 2 literacy coaches that help serve our district. Both of those literacy coaches came from McDonald. Really proud of that. Really, I do believe speaks to the volume of our building's approach and being really the literacy leaders, so to speak, not only within our district, but quite honestly, I do believe within our area and our region of Pennsylvania. So with all that being said, teachers want to take action. So let's enable them to take action. How can we do that as leadership, from building leadership and central leadership perspective? We have to remove barriers, address the weak underlying knowledge base that could potentially be there. You'll be surprised how many teachers might have a very strong knowledge base. However, they might be the minority. And when the majority rules, perhaps there's that level of peer pressure amongst the colleagues. Addressing this knowledge base, putting expectations in place, is going to empower the teachers to take action. Then the lack of resources. I can tell you, this was a really big one. I have another slide coming up in a moment that's going to speak to the lack of resources, but identifying them and removing those barriers. And then one of the biggest things, the teachers would understand the research that we spoke about. But then the question was, well, Ernie, how does that look like in the classroom? How does that translate to instruction? And whether you're a researcher that researches reading for a living, or you're a practitioner who's in the classroom, that's been the gap there. And that actually, since I've started a couple of years ago with this shift, I do believe the gap is closing, but it's still there. So how do you help support that, build that bridge between research and classroom practice? And a really interesting piece that maybe that isn't spoken enough, but scheduling, making sure you have, in my opinion, uninterrupted time for reading, where you're not throwing a specials in the middle of the reading block, you're not throwing a recess or a lunch unless you absolutely have to. I'm very proud to say that our 6th grades have continuous uninterrupted, what we call RELA, Reading English Language Arts instruction. And so that's really important with our intervention time built in daily. So making sure that the scheduling helps support the instruction that we're trying to get to. So start by strengthening teacher knowledge. One of the biggest things that we were working on was understanding oral language development and how it's the foundation to written language. And if you've gone through letters training, or perhaps some other AIM, I know AIM training is big up in the Connecticut area and the New England area, so to speak. And I'm super big fans of our friends from AIM, the AIM Institute for Reading and Research. And of course, the Reading League, who's here with us, providing this really strong understanding of how oral language serves as the foundation for written language, and how our listening and ability to speak were natural, but then our ability to read and write, not natural. However, the oral language piece helps support the written language piece, and understanding how important direct instruction is, direct and explicit, because I got to tell you, what most educators, at least that's been my experience in the 2 school districts that I've worked in, and many educators who I've spoken to across our state and our area here, it was the directive, what they were taught is teach in the moment when it comes to things like phonics. Teach it right then and there and as it comes up. So this more of an implicit approach to, instead of a direct explicit instruction approach. That's what our children have been receiving over the last however many years. I mean, I got to tell you, since I've been working in education since 2001, so I'm talking 20 years now. So, and I'm sure it's been longer than that. And so understanding the importance and how to teach direct and explicitly in terms of phonemic awareness, phonics, and other things. And so the language systems, I speak about phonemic awareness. I got to tell you, when I started understanding the science of reading, I would not have confidently, as a building leader of a K-5 building, I would not have been confident to tell you what the difference was between phonics and phonological awareness, or what the difference between phonological awareness and phonemic awareness was. To me, they just sounded all the same and they seemed very similar. Had no idea. And it really wasn't until I immersed myself that I understood what the differences were and how important each one of them were in the process of reading. And also understanding, although it might appear linear in process, it doesn't always work out that way. So understanding that, understanding what orthography meant and the 6 syllable types. There are syllable types, really? What are they? And quite honestly, I might have known 2 or 3 of them just because I knew them. I know what the magic E is. I didn't know that was a syllable type. And then to really look for syllable types within multisyllabic words, or to rely on things like morphology to help support our grades 2 to 5 students as they attack multisyllabic words when they're reading, and understanding semantics and syntax and the pragmatics, which are on the language comprehension side of the reading rote. Never knew that as a 13-year elementary teacher. Oh man, I feel so terrible. And this level of guilt that I went through, because I know I had some of the neediest children when I worked in my first district, which was an urban district that served over 16,000 students, who 80% were economically disadvantaged, if not higher. And so understanding the needs that were there and me providing such, oh man, not the best reading instruction. And so having our educators today really understanding this, the building leaders really understanding this to help support reading literacy instructional practices. So the language system's really important. And then again, explicit and systematic instruction, what is it? What does it look like? And then understanding that that's a core principle of effective literacy instruction for both skilled and emerging readers. There was some level of pushback, so be ready for this. Oh, we're going to teach explicit and systematic phonics instruction. Our highest readers are going to be bored. It's been my experience. I don't have research to support this on my end, other than it's been my experience at my building that the highest readers are not, one, they're not bored, and two, we found gaps in their skill set. And so it helped fill in those gaps to make them even better readers. And so that's my argument to how important explicit and systematic instruction is, and assessing where the children are so that we can address the deficits. So again, looking to address this as a district. Now, I mentioned removing barriers. Well, I got to tell you, up until 2019, we didn't have Core 1 phonemic awareness instruction. It didn't exist. So that was one of the first things that we had to address in terms of making sure, one, we understood what it was, and then two, that we had an approach to teach the phonemic awareness that our children were lacking in the Tier 1 setting. And then in terms of phonics, instead of an implicit approach, more explicit, more systematic, sequential, and building off of the previous lesson and with more challenging content. One of the biggest things, orthography, especially orthographic mapping and connecting the sounds, the phonemes to the graphemes, whether it's a single letter or a sequence of letters, and whether it's a decodable word or whether it's a irregular word, it doesn't matter. The orthographic piece has been huge. Tier 1 instruction, intervention instruction. And then how do we improve language structure and vocabulary? So like in our upper grades, grades 4 and 5, that's our focus to start the school year in terms of enhancing our vocabulary instruction and understanding tiers of words and how to really shift away from practices that are proven to be inefficient or ineffective, like using a dictionary to look up words and creating words lists from dictionary definitions, and aligning it with ways to provide students with a kid-friendly definition, an opportunity to see it in the text that they're going to be reading and discussing it and having dialogue so that it's really going to have lasting impact. We talk about frequency with vocabulary words and robustness. And so those two aspects are what we're really focusing on in our upper elementary piece. So when we reflect and we were redesigning our framework with regards to literacy, again, looking at we need to have dedicated time for phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. And I will say this, there are some educators and researchers who advocate that you don't specifically need time dedicated for phonemic awareness or phonological awareness, that it can be embedded. And I don't argue that. I actually very much agree with that. However, how can I have teachers really start embedding something that they're not so strongly familiar with? And so from the building leadership perspective, I believe having something that the teachers can rely on until that level of comfort is there is better than what we had prior, which was nothing. And so think about it as the change process. And then systematic phonics instruction, what does that look like? What's the expectation? Clearly define expectations, K-2, whole group, working on decoding, working on encoding, which is spelling. And then, that should say 15 minutes. It says 1 5-minute, but it should say 15-minute small groups to reinforce and enrich. And then again, when it comes to things like sight words, what does that mean? Okay, we got rid of the definition of what sight words meant, because quite honestly, to my teachers and myself included, Sight words were words we saw and we had to memorize. Well, we're getting away from that and relying on the orthography of words. And I love the word said. I use that word as an example because the S and the D still make their sounds. And it's just that AI, that's the part that we actually have to remember. The importance of fluency, practice at the phoneme, grapheme, word, and sentence level. And then huge decodables, something we were severely lacking. Again, remember I talked about removing barriers? Well, a barrier was how are the boys and girls really going to practice the things that they're learning when they don't have readers that are going to support what it is that they're learning? Huge shift. Central administration for us came up really big with the purchasing of really quality decodable readers that help support our phonics program. And in terms of language comprehension, again, explicit vocabulary instructions. We get cute with it. Look, we're elementary. We got to do cute, sparkle words, and then also carefully selecting books that spend a lot of time on, not a lot of time, but more time activating, building, connecting background knowledge, and that are also culturally responsive to our demographic, which is very diverse and McDonald in our district. And I've done a lot of research on Connecticut. I got to tell you, really impressed how diverse, and quite honestly, even a little surprised how diverse Connecticut is, because I really don't know much about the United States demographics north of Pennsylvania. Spent a lot of time down south going to Florida, but I've seen the demographics of Connecticut, very diverse area. So you take action in terms of identifying your tier 2 and 3 students. One thing that we had was we had too many options for our intervention. So we did an inventory, and we really trimmed out some resources that we felt really weren't going to help support us, so that we weren't overloading our children. So again, if you remember what I mentioned earlier, intervention is an extension of the core 1 instructional piece, and that created consistency for our boys and girls so that there wasn't this confusion, which would potentially add to their inability to focus on what they're learning. And so along the way, we celebrated small victories. Now, the instructional victories, I can tell you, we didn't do a thorough investigation of this, but my teachers and I did an informal tally of how many times we noticed our kids' eyes going off the words, looking at the picture, kind of moving around instead of focusing on the orthography of the word. And so small victories, we were sharing that out, K1, 2. The phonemic proficiency that we see in our data has really gone up, really strong, very proud of that. I just alluded to the orthographic learning, which connects to keeping eyes on the word, and then the importance of word level reading and how to use that data piece that we get from our universal screener to help understand the profile of each student, and the importance of explicit teaching. And I can tell you how we celebrated this victory, or why I should say, is because last year when we were in the virtual piece, as many districts were, we really had to understand that we weren't going to be teaching in the virtual space as we would in the classroom. So what were the non-negotiables? And the explicit instruction for our phonics and phonemic awareness, even though it was a challenge virtually, was our non-negotiables. And that wasn't simply something from central and building level leadership. That was in collaboration with our teachers to say, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that we definitely have to keep in there, knowing that we can't get through everything. And with our teachers' feedback and input, we understood that. And to me, that's we celebrate it as a small victory, but I think it's really big. And in terms of systems, the systematic teaching with our connected text, with decodables, our decision-making, diagnostic and prescriptive, so much improved. It's even impacted our ELD programming. It's benefiting our special ed program. So the decision-making in terms of being able to diagnose, find the skills that they're deficient in, and really addressing it, progress monitoring, assessing it, not overloading assessing, but doing it effectively and efficiently so that we can have more time for instruction. I can tell you through our inventory of how we were assessing prior to the 2019-2020 school year to where we are now, we have gotten back, I want to say about 10 instructional days. because of our efficiency with assessing and then how we go about with our data process and analyzing the data as a team, as a school, and then one-on-one as individuals with the teacher. So really excited and really proud of our district's systems victories. So the change process, I have to tell you, one of the biggest benefits is when it becomes organic. The teachers want more, they yearn for more. Now, there's always going to be that delicate balance of teacher contracts and obligations. However, when it's there, they want to maximize the time to really push forward with this literacy approach, the shift, and on their own time, you'll see when the Reading League's offering the symposium, when the Reading League's offering their conference, I'd like to go, I want to be a part of this, and I want this book, I want to join this professional development. It is awesome. The numerous webinars that are available, the online resources. I know I can tell you, I have a number of teachers who frequent the Reading League YouTube channel, and they send me stuff. And it's a really cool feeling to see how organic it becomes to help move the needle a little bit in our building and our district. So we continue the change process. Now, we're still working with maximizing our universal screening, benchmarking, and using that data, how to set SMART goals with that data, how to really help support our at-risk and struggling children, how to really understand the importance of fluency. I got to tell you, prior to the shift, if a student was struggling with fluency, they receive fluency practice. Well, that's not always the case. It might not be fluency. It might be something more underlying. So we're still continuing to implement change to help support that. One of the biggest things, and if you might have heard this, you might have not. A lot of the teachers question why we had to have timed assessments, because they felt that it was really adding pressure to the children, and they weren't getting a really good read on them, and really having to understand the importance of timed versus untimed assessments, knowledge versus proficiency, and then really, really important, the route to reading proficiency. And again, I mentioned earlier that route, although it might seem linear, isn't always linear, and we have to be flexible and understand that. So where we are, what we've been able to accomplish so far, we're honoring again the room, but we're always looking. I can tell you in grades 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, but really 3, 4, 5, we're looking to add a morphology piece to it that will help support the phonological and phonemic piece that we have in the K-2, since in grades 3, 4, 5, they're really working on more multisyllabic words, understanding the 6 syllable types, how that impacts the coding multisyllabic words. Really big, really important understanding roots, the prefixes, suffixes, the language origins of words, really looking to implement that over the next year. So that's our journey. We're nowhere near where we want to be, but we are much further ahead than where we were even last year, definitely 2 years ago, and absolutely 3 years ago. And I'll end with this. I'm fortunate enough to live in the district where I get to serve as a building principal. My son goes to McDonald Elementary School, and he's benefited from the quality tier 1 instruction that he's been receiving, and he's benefited even more so from the intervention that he needed. So again, organic for me as a parent, organic for me as a building leader, and I implore all the leaders here to help support that shift, all the teachers to continue looking to improve and be better, and for any central administrators here, although it might seem as if that when you're up in the central administration realm, you might not see how important this is at the 10 to 15 minute a day micro level of how phonemic awareness impacts reading development, but it does, and you play a role in it as well. And I just want to thank everyone today for joining this session. And I hope you found it really meaningful and informative.
This has been so excellent, Ernie. Thank you so much for sharing everything. We do have some questions for you.
Okay.
And if any of our attendees want to continue to put questions in the Q&A, please do that. One of the questions that we have for you, how have you involved parents in your change process, especially mentioning your diverse socioeconomic background of your school?
Great question. So I can tell you that we have monthly ELD programming family meetings. That's our English language development family meetings at McDonald. We have a population of we have 800 students. And in that 800 students, I want to say, 20% are in our ESL program. So 20% of that 800. It might even be more now. I'm not, yeah, it might be even more than that. So we involve them and how they can help support our children, but we also, particularly in the younger grades, K1, 2, whether it's our, whether it was back to school night, we had literacy nights and also math nights. We are a school-wide Title I programming school. So there are family engagement requirements that we meet. And it's very easy to design workshops that focus on, we've done things that focus on the importance of phonemic awareness, what parents can do to help support that at home, the importance of what type of skill strategies that they can help support. When I mentioned, remember if you mentioned, I mentioned earlier, if you remember, looking at the picture and to guess a word. And for so long, we had told parents that was the thing to do. So for parents, especially for parents who might have had a child or two go through the school district, that took some getting used to. Oh, wait, now, why don't we want to look at the words? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So having those conversations and having the people to help support those conversations, myself included, those were ways that we were able to engage the parents. We don't want to beat them over the head with research. We want to help them with practical things that they can do at home, phonemic awareness, phonics, quality books. And it wasn't simply sit down and read with your children. It was how to go about it. And we even spoke about how even a word that might be irregular, let's focus on the regular parts and then highlight the part that's truly irregular. Like the example said, I've used that example so many times. Everyone knows that's my go-to word for that type of concept being shared with someone. So we've had those conversations with parents, and it wasn't just me, my teachers as well.
That's really helpful. Another question about professional development time. Our district, if someone's saying our district doesn't provide us with building-based professional development time, how would you suggest leveraging the building time to support the advancement of some of these practices?
I get that one a lot. The one thing that I've done, we all have, I mean, it's been my experience, most schools have faculty meetings, and that is at the very least something that you can tap into that time to really help with building level professional development. And I'll share what we do at McDonald. So we break up our faculty meetings into K-2, 3 to 5. The rationale for that is because K-2 has a specific, they have particular curricular materials and universal screening that's different than 3 to 5. And so with our K-2, huge focus on phonemic awareness, phonics, our universal screening, which is Dibble's data, and the zones of growth piece that helps with our SMART goal development. Grades 3 to 5, map testing, IXL diagnostic tools, and then how that helps support our instruction with vocabulary and syntax, semantics, other aspects of what would be on the language comprehension side, inferencing. So we break those two. So it's an hour a month that we get for faculty meeting. Those hour, the K-2 hour is different than the 3 to 5 hour. And again, I was unfortunate enough to have an assistant principal, so we can divvy up the responsibilities. There might be some nuance information that might be similar, I should say. And then the nuances of the differences of the grades is what we focus on. But that's a really important piece that it really shouldn't simply be one-way communication in terms of here's some logistical stuff that really serves for the systems piece of operational of a building, but take the time to maximize the instructional piece for faculty meetings. That would be my recommendation.
That's great. I think that's a great use of time. What have you found to be a compelling hook to initiate change?
Well, data serves as a great hook, data. So I can tell you, I shared with you our data and the reflection that I had when I was having my aha moment, so to speak, where that 4 out of 10 students in our 3rd grade were still not proficient at reading. And I got to be honest with you, that 3rd grade reading test really isn't the most challenging thing in the world. They read, there's some text dependent questions. And really, I believe we should be much higher than that, at least 20% more higher than that, if not pushing 90. And so 90%. And so, I think about how data can be leveraged. I've referenced the NAEP scores a lot in 2019, how the 52 jurisdictions, out of the 52 jurisdictions that are measured in NAEP, only one showed a significant score increase. And I believe many of you are going to know that that state is Mississippi. And when you ask the state superintendent, when she was asked, what were some of the reasons why you made such significant growth? One of the points that she made a point to highlight was her state's aligning with the evidence with the science of reading, huge. And so data helps create that sense of urgency, that hook, so to speak. And, they say the data doesn't lie. And so use it to your advantage to really spark that sense of urgency.
I love that. I think we have about 2 more questions. One is about Board of Eds. Did you find that your Board of Ed was supportive? Did you go to them? How are they involved?
I got to be honest with you, they were not involved. They're not as involved as perhaps we would like for them to be involved, but I have to say that they have a lot of trust in us. I do participate as well as other building principals in our district in providing reports and discussion points to them and data. And so they're kept informed, they're in the loop. However, it isn't a tough sell. They see the data as well. We have a plan and they trust the leadership that's here. And so one might argue, well, that's how we got here in the first place. Okay, I get it. But to be transparent, they weren't as engaged as perhaps we would like them to be.
That makes sense. I think our last question speaks to how excellent your presentation has been. Someone is asking, do you ever come to speak to schools or districts? Because we definitely need you.
I have not, but I would welcome the opportunity. And when the Reading League Connecticut reached out to me, I had to be really transparent. And this is just serendipity, I'm telling you. My wife and I were actually considering moving to Connecticut over the last year or so. And so I haven't had a chance to do just that. I would love to visit Connecticut. So if you want to give me an opportunity, I would definitely make the drive. I have had an opportunity and I will be going out to New Orleans and I believe February to work with a number of administrators with the Reading League Louisiana chapter and to help further this, the important piece aspect of leadership helping this shift, because what I've seen a lot of is teachers trying to make the shift and in isolated pockets and it not really going as far as it can or as far as they like it to. That's why it's so critically important for the building leadership to do that. And so I see that as a gap in the services, so to speak, to help the leaders get a little bit more sense of urgency for them to be more involved, because it's really easy when you're a building leader to get bogged down with these little things that take up so much of our time. But I'm telling you, when you go through that interview process, they're asking you instructional leadership type questions that see your qualities. And when we start living it, it's easy to get away from that. So this serves as a great reminder as to what it is that is our most important part of our job, after keeping everyone safe, obviously, is that instructional piece. So, hey, let me know. You have my email. I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone, but I really do have a lot of passion and I really want this to spread further than just this webinar.
Ernie, we just want to thank you so much for your time. It's very rare that we hear from administrators. So having one so passionate is just so inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you. We're going to take a moment and we're going to look at the Reading League's Reading Buddies. We were so excited about this new TV series. And then we're going to hear from our Spotlight partners.
You're here! You made it! I'm Dot, like the polka dot, and this is my dog, Dusty.
Like the dust. What do a dog, a girl, and a robot have in common? We We are reading buddies.
Reading buddies. I really wish you could stay.
Dusty.
We'll see ya. Oh, huh?
Oh, and best friends. That's me, Dusty. And that's my human, Dot. See, I love to talk, but learning to read is my new special skill. With the help of Dot and Alphabot, she's our reading tool. I'm finding that reading can be so much fun. We learn letters, new sounds, and how to just be a good friend, you know?
We're learning so many letters and sounds together. Soon, we'll learn them all.
Little by little.
Letter by letter.
See you in the reading room.
You're here.
Hello. We at Southern Connecticut State University are delighted to welcome the new chapter of the Reading League to Connecticut. I'm Dr. Stephen Hegedus, Dean of the College of Education here at Southern. We offer more than 30 degree programs in education across the undergraduate, master's, 6-year, and doctoral levels of study. Our College of Education prepares one of the largest number of education graduates in the state of Connecticut. We have a long history of preparing our teachers to provide explicit, cumulative, and systematic reading instruction, going all the way back to the 1970s, when Professor Betty Gallistel first published her Gallistel-Ellis test of decoding skills. Further, we think of literacy in terms of a developmental trajectory. So our candidates develop the ability to engage elementary, middle, and high school learners in literacy learning that is authentic, content-based, and highly engaging. Our graduate reading program is fully recognized by the International Literacy Association and the International Dyslexia Association, so that together with our students, we continue to expand the research and practice base in the art and science of literacy instruction.
Hi, my name is Professor Regine Randall, and along with Professors Louise Shaw and Laura Reynolds, we comprise the faculty in the graduate reading program at Southern Connecticut State U. Our graduate reading programs are founded on social justice. As literacy expert Phyllis Hunter observed, reading is the new civil right. Students in all Connecticut schools have the right to attain a level of literacy that provides access, empowerment, happiness, and opportunity. Because language and literacy form the basis of our program, we prepare candidates to consider the whole child while also ensuring that they have the theoretical and practical knowledge to provide effective literacy instruction to all children. To that end, our candidates graduate with the hands-on skills necessary to teach typically developing readers to those with dyslexia, to English learners and dialect speakers, to high school students transitioning to college or careers. We invite you to explore our multiple programs as you further your education. Thank you.
The Connecticut SOR Group is proud to be a Spotlight partner with the Reading League Connecticut chapter, and we are excited to welcome them to this effort to create lasting change in education. We'd love to invite you to come join our Connecticut SOR Group. The Reading League Connecticut's conference theme, The Defining Movement, is exactly in alignment with our mission to reach all educators in Connecticut and create momentum in understanding the true findings of the science of reading. You'll get free professional development opportunities. You'll connect and converse with a local professional community of Connecticut educators. You'll get access to recorded PD webinars at our YouTube channel. You'll stay informed on Connecticut legislation and help us spread the word. Here's how to join, and you can find us at this link. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to see Jill. I see Jill and know that there are many others tuning in right now. And that song is perfect because the sun just came out about 20 minutes ago where I am. And hopefully you're seeing the sun too, wherever you are. I am Margie Gillis. I'm the president of Literacy How and a Reading League of Connecticut board member. And I'm very pleased to introduce you all to the next presentation, Bringing the Simple View of Reading to Life. By way of introduction, let me tell you a little bit about our three presenters, all of whom I've gotten to know and happily have worked with. Suzanne Nobles is Chief Academic Officer of ReadWorks, whose mission is to support the growth of successful, joyful readers by providing K-12 teachers with what to teach and how to teach it online for free to be shared broadly. Suzanne has spent her career working to empower educators and students with research, structures, and tools for meaningful and effective learning. Her doctoral research focused on creating effective digital communities of practice, which put her in good stead for the work that she'll share today. Jill Lauren has been teaching LD students of all ages for over 35 years. You don't look old enough to have done that. You started when you were 10, Jill. Known as an expert in the area of reading and writing instruction, Jill has trained teachers around the country to utilize a variety of structured, multisensory approaches to teach reading and writing. Jill authored That's Like Me and Succeeding with LD. Recently, she created Whole Phonics, a structured literacy program for early readers, which you'll hear about today. And I can also say and attest to having used Whole Phonics to teach my oldest grandchild to read during the pandemic. It was so much fun. The books are phenomenal and we love them. All of my mentors have also used them. Last but not least, Nancy Chappell Eberhardt is currently an educational consultant and author. She has experience as a special ed teacher, an administrator, and professional development provider. When I first met Nancy, she was working on the development of the literacy intervention curriculum called Language, a program that I used for quite some time and love. Subsequently, she and I developed the Literacy How Professional Learning series. And Nancy and I also work together serving as members of IDA's Perspectives, and we are board members now of the Reading League Connecticut. Thank you, Jill, Nancy, and Suzanne for joining us today to share your knowledge, your wisdom, your collective work to support emerging readers in both word recognition and language comprehension skills.
Thank you, Margie. Oops. I got to unmute here. No, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, that was weird. I got an unmute message. Thank you, Margie. And it is with really great pleasure that we wind up or end up this conference today. I think there are going to be several things that are memorable as they've occurred throughout the day. Namely, we've seen the reading rope, we've seen the simple view of reading, and we're probably going to be humming Here Comes the Sun for quite some time. But Margie, thank you for the introduction. In addition, Margie didn't mention that if it hadn't been for Margie introducing me to ReadWorks, and I already knew Jill, what we're presenting today might not have ever happened. So Margie, thank you for introducing us and for being a part of this presentation today. As the slide says, we're trying to bring the simple view of reading to life. I think everyone today actually has been doing that. But what we want to try to do today is end on not only a theoretical note, but on a really practical note, because in addition to what we're going to be talking about, the materials we're sharing are free. So you're getting a freebie to end the day, and we hope that will help you go forward and implement some of the things we've been hearing all day long. So the reading rope we've seen many times today. Many of you have seen it many times before, but it is a wonderful reminder of all the threads, all the components that go into becoming a skilled reader. And then, of course, the simple view of reading reconfigures that into these two major components, those that are part of the top of the reading rope, which are the language comprehension, and then those that make up the bottom part of the rope, which is decoding. One of the things that the simple view of reading helps us remember is not only the major components, the major elements of this formula, but it also reminds us, and I think Ernie said this earlier, that these things don't exist sequentially. They have to be developing concurrently. And so one of the things that this partnership between Whole Phonics and ReadWorks is designed to do is to actually help teachers do exactly that, to be working on the code breaking skills while working on language comprehension to result in skilled readers that comprehend. Now, one thing we're going to emphasize today is the text that's a part of this. We're not going to dwell on the details of phonics lessons or specifically vocabulary lessons or whatever, but rather how different kinds of text facilitate what we're trying to develop with our students. So the first part, which we're going to talk about, is the text that we use when we're teaching decoding. And logically, that's decodable text. Now, not everybody knows that, but it really is decodable text that we need. So what is decodable text? Quite simply, it is text designed with the code in mind. But what's really important here are the points on the left side of the screen, which is that the text must be matched to a scope and sequence. All words basically are made up of our code, but what makes decodable text so unique and so important is that it's emphasizing a particular part of a sequence of phonics instruction. And it is indeed that scope and sequence that is the foundation of decodable text. Also, decodable text, what makes it unique is that most of the words within a particular story or article that may be written is that most of the words follow that scope and sequence. But what's on the right-hand side is equally important, perhaps more important if we talk about using decodable text, namely that the decodable text maps onto the skills that the students have been taught. Therefore, what we need to be sure is happening is that we have taught the code that is needed to read the decodable text. Otherwise, the decodable text is no different than other authentic type of text, which we'll look at in a moment. Each lesson provides an opportunity to practice accuracy, to get to automaticity, and certainly when we put the decodable words into a connected text, it allows us to work on fluency, because fluency is not only speed or accuracy, but it also is bringing that prosody to the text. So let's take a look at an example of how this explicit relationship between code to text works. And this example, rightfully so, is from Whole Phonics. And in the very first book, the sounds that the student needs to know is short A. Then they also need the particular set of consonants. And with that knowledge, the code to text instruction that has occurred, the students will have success in reading the words that are in the text. They won't have to rely on a picture. They won't have to guess at the meaning or what might make sense. They can actually read every single word. There are a couple, like the word is and the word on, that are high frequency words that we teach as part of the lesson, but they make up a very small percentage. As we move through that scope and sequence upon which whole phonics is based, we see that by the time we get to the last story in book, in the level 1, the students have all the short vowels, have all the consonant sounds, and look at how much more text and how many more words and the language that the students can read by the time we get to this point. But by way of contrast, oops, let me just go back. So the scope and sequence is huge in terms of, and important in terms of what makes decodable text decodable. But I'd like to stop and sort of put in a pitch for the importance of scope and sequence at perhaps a little bit bigger level. And I think Margaret this morning was really making the case for this as well, which was scope and sequence matters not only for the teachers, but also for the students, or vice versa, not only for the students, but for the teachers. So take this case in point. If each first grade teacher teaches their own version of the scope and sequence, then as those students move on to the next grade, chances are good that they will be regrouped as they move from one grade to the next, because usually we don't keep kids together forever from one year to the next. So now the second grade teacher has the challenge of figuring out what have the students learned if in fact there is not an agreed upon scope and sequence. Can the teachers figure this out from year to year? Yes, they can. Is it more efficient and in the best interest of the students to be able to build from year to year without having to backtrack and reassess to figure out what students know? We would argue that it is an accelerator if we can use a scope and sequence. Now, in contrast, and this is not to say anything negative about authentic text, but authentic text has a different purpose, and that is that authentic text is written with no particular code to text match in mind. So just to show, this is from ReadWorks, and it's a passage that is on the website for beginning readers, but it was intended as listening text. And why that's so important is if we look at the code that is required in that right-hand box, how many more elements a student would have to know to be able to read this. It is considerable. And if all the students have learned our short vowels, it's pretty much impossible unless they start to do what? They start to guess. They guess based on the context, based on the pictures, based on what they know about cats, but they're really not reading the text. So again, authentic text is not bad text. It's just really different in terms of what it offers in terms of instruction. So we just talked about what is decodable text, why decodable text. Well, first of all, and really critical here is that in the work that Castles, Raskell, and Nation put out in an article on ending the reading wars, in which they were trying to review what do we know about what we should teach and how we should teach it. They identified the why decodable text is that it fundamentally provides children with an opportunity to practice the code that they've been learning. And it sets them up for what is hugely important, which is success. What ends up happening is that the students begin to trust that they have a strategy, they have a technique to be able to actually figure out the words on the page. We also find that evidence suggests that phonics instruction is more effective when they can immediately apply it into a text situation and put it to work for reading. We also look to the work of Heidi Mesmer, who talks a lot about decodable text, and she says some of the same things of bridging the developmental transition to reading words. It provides the ability for students to transfer that individual letter sound knowledge to text, and it really empowers them to use their decoding. And when I was reading this work by Heidi Mesmer, it took me back to something that Marilyn Adams said, and this is a stunning number because it's 1997. I mean, this, and I was actually there when she did this. I mean, I remember this coming out, and she said about decodable text, or about text, the supportive features in a text, be they repeated words, supportive pictures, rhyming words, or consistency between letters and sounds, affect that to which the beginning reader attends. Therefore, she says, decodable text encourages the use of letter sound knowledge. So that's what decodable text is designed to do. It's designed to give kids the content to be reading that they can trust will allow them to use what they know. The second paragraph is kind of an updated version or updated information, somewhat, of how this idea of understanding the alphabetic principle and orthographic mapping is how we get words from short-term memory, which is we're always working out the code, to moving it as an orthographically mapped word, which is our sight word, into long-term memory. And we know the minute or that point when we can move more and more words from short-term memory to long-term memory is when we allow students to free up their memory to be able to think about, what do those words mean? What is this story about? What is this information about? So for all those reasons, that's why we want to use decodable text. Recently, there was a wonderful webinar done by curriculummatters.org and the New Teacher Project, in which they talked about, especially since we have so many children behind due to the pandemic, how do we accelerate learning? And one of the things that made the list of accelerators was not only practicing the code, as we often do with activities where we're talking about single words and sometimes with flashcards and so on, but when we move those words into context, we help to accelerate the application of the code that students have learning. So think of decodable text as an accelerator. Now we know that decodable text sometimes gets a bad reputation as being lesser text. I think that we have to keep in mind its purpose. But last fall, Wiley Blevins did a wonderful webinar that I highly recommend you look up. They did this for the Reading League National group, in which he listed for us some gold standards of decodable text. And I think if we look at those standards, we might have a better outlook about decodable text and their reason for being. First of all, they should be instructive. And this goes back to the earlier point I was talking about, which is there needs to be a lesson to text match. Namely, decodable text is part of a phonics lesson. It's the thing we're building up to. That's why we're doing it. Second of all, and this sometimes gets lost with decodable text, is that there should be comprehensibility to it. There should be a storyline, something that is happening that isn't dependent only on the pictures or just silly little phrases. And then one more point is that it should be engaging. Just because it's decodable doesn't mean it has to be dull. So we can use color and humor and perhaps connect to human reaction. So I thought it might be helpful to illustrate a couple of these gold standard texts. One of them, I coincidentally from Flyleaf, and I did this before they were one of our spotlight partners today, is this little excerpt that I'm going to show you. And this is about Frank, who's a fish, and he has this phenomenal fish tank that he lives in, as described by the text, and is enhanced by the illustration. So one would have to wonder when we get to the next page, but Frank was sad, we'd have to wonder, why could this fish be sad if he's got this fabulous home? This is an example of a comprehensible story. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to find out, why could this fish be sad having such a lovely house to live in? And then the illustration of, it doesn't have to be dull. And this is from one of the whole phonics readers. These pictures are outrageous. They're humorous. Kids love it. But you don't necessarily need the pictures to read the words or vice versa. So this is an example of that the stories can be fun and still be decodable. So that tackles our decoding text, or a text for decoding, as part of the simple view. I'd like to turn it over now to Suzanne, who's going to talk about the language comprehension part of the equation. Suzanne.
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you. And so, yes, I'm going to dig now into the language comprehension piece, and then we will put the two pieces together into the resources that you can use and take away. So yes, Nancy, go ahead and move forward. So let's look first at the seminal research behind background knowledge and how it impacts reading comprehension. And this is important to think about because we're talking about pre-fluent readers here. And so how they gain background knowledge through listening comprehension simultaneously while learning to decode, and that is gaining that background knowledge while they're still learning to read. So Recht and Leslie's study was done in the late 80s. It has been replicated multiple times and is the basis of understanding that impact on reading comprehension. So you can see here, we have these 4 colors, and what the researchers did was break students into 4 groups. Based on school-based testing, they had the top line, which was high reading ability, versus the lower line, which is low reading. They then tested students on their knowledge of baseball and broke the highs and the lows into high and low knowledge of baseball. They had them read a passage on baseball and then take a standard reading comprehension assessment of that passage. And so let's see what the results show. And Nancy will click to reveal.
Nancy will.
Okay, so here are the results. They were very interesting. First of all, you might have guessed that the yellow bar would be highest, our high reading ability, high knowledge. It said high, they're the highest bar. What was most interesting was the orange bar, and that students that had been assessed as having low reading ability came in second. They were the second highest functioning readers when they could bring their baseball knowledge to a text about baseball. And if you note how much lower that blue bar is, these high readers that did not know about baseball struggled. They couldn't bring background knowledge to the text to then activate how they knew how to unpack a text. And so what do we as educators do with this research? And thank you, Nancy. So we're going to look at this mathematically because it was an easy way to lay out these points. And so we're going to unpack this idea of all comprehension relies on background knowledge. So first of all, knowledge is greater than reading skills in this way, and meaning that it impacts it first. Doesn't mean that reading skills aren't also important, but knowledge is what brings us into the text. So we have this quote from Natalie Wexler's book, The Knowledge Gap, that whether or not readers understand a text depends far more on how much background knowledge and vocabulary they have relating to the topic than on how much they've practiced comprehension skills. And this has been shown, as I said, in multiple studies over decades. Next. So then more knowledge equals more comprehension. So that's the great takeaway from this, is that the students that have the broadest knowledge have the best chance of demonstrating their comprehension. They can bring that knowledge to that initial encounter with the text. And that's where we get at the listening level comprehension that's so important, as we see when we put the simple view of reading together in a few slides. And then finally here, knowledge equals even more knowledge. The great news as well is that the more you know, the easier it will be for you to learn new things. Knowledge sticks to other knowledge. And so as students are building their knowledge, they do it exponentially faster. And so let's look at one way that they can do that even more faster, even more quickly. So that is article sets. And so we're going to dig into these as a research-based practice, and then you will see how they play into the resources that we have to show you. So researchers have studied text sets. These are sets of text, I'm sure you've all used them before, that are conceptually or thematically related. And what they have found is that they are particularly beneficial for this key knowledge building. And I just explained that as knowledge is built over time, students can understand more and more challenging text. They bring that knowledge to the text. What's really great, and it's the piece you may have been thinking all along, is, Suzanne, what about the vocabulary? So much of this is always about what students know word-wise, and vocabulary is part of our background knowledge. It's definitely what we bring to the text. And what researchers have found is that text sets, is that text sets give repeated words. They have a natural repetition of vocabulary that really deepens a student's knowledge of the vocabulary. And it may not be the exact same words that are repeated, but they're within word families, they're different word forms. So it's a very rich exposure to a similar set of words that helps students really gain that vocabulary. Okay, which brings us to go to Nancy's point of decodable text being an accelerator. Reading article sets is also an accelerator, and you may have already been thinking this. So going back to quoting Natalie Wexler, new knowledge sticks and holds to other knowledge. And so this whole idea that when we take an article set and we're building along the same topic for multiple texts, we are accelerating that knowledge building, we're accelerating that vocabulary building. And a study by Landauer and Dumais showed that reading or listening to multiple texts, and that's key. I've been talking about reading, but I keep mentioning listening comprehension, and this does apply to just listening to the text as well. Listening to text on the same topic builds vocabulary 4 times faster, and that is a lot faster. Okay, so let's now look into, okay, Suzanne, you've talked all about text sets. Why? Why text sets? The research is there. So ReadWorks, our mission as a nonprofit, is dedicated to this crucial building of background knowledge and growing vocabulary. Those are the resources that we provide. And so our flagship product is Article a Day, and that is built around this research-based best practice of using text sets to systematically grow this background knowledge and vocabulary. And so we have a little bit of our research here on our Article a Day product. So in a New York State small pilot study of 9 schools, students showed a 15% year-over-year gain in those end-of-year test scores, doing Article a Day regularly throughout the year. This wasn't because teachers knew what was going to be on that end-of-the-year test. They knew what content to teach the students. It was that students had a much broader exposure to knowledge through these text sets and a deeper understanding of vocabulary through these text sets that they brought to the new passages on the assessment that then help them activate their reading strategies to get into that text. And then I just love this, this stat here about almost 50,000 more words. And that's the key with Article a Day. And everything we're talking about today is supplementing students' reading instruction. Article a Day layers on so much more reading into the instruction that you're doing. And we all know as teachers that we can only instruct this much, and we need students to read so much more to really become the successful readers that they all can be. Okay, so just a little bit more here about what Article a Day is. So it is a 10-minute daily routine. There are 4 steps. You start out, as with all good teaching, setting the purpose. You let students know that they are reading or listening to the text in order to build their background knowledge and vocabulary. They then do that. They pick, here's a picture of a set. You can see that there are 9 articles in the set, so students get to pick one, but they're all about animals. So they read or listen, and ReadWorks has audio for all of the texts for listening. Then they attach the reading to writing by completing a book of knowledge where they write what they've learned, or they draw it if they are pre-fluent writers. And then finally, they share their knowledge. It brings in speaking as well into this process. And so students learn from each other, and they also deepen their memory of what they've learned by talking about it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just one more critical point. We're going to finally get into this listening comprehension point a little bit more before we move into the how to support all of this. And so the key is that this work can start right away, because as you can see on this chart, listening comprehension is immediate. from birth. We listen, we pick up things, and we gain them. It helps us become speakers, and then it helps us become readers. And so we can begin building students' comprehension through listening as it outpaces that reading comprehension. And then when reading turns on for students, then they accelerate even more because of all of the knowledge, vocabulary, syntax, awareness of language that they've gained as listeners and now can apply as readers. Which brings us to this concurrent nature of the simple view of reading. And so bringing in read work, supporting that critical piece of language comprehension through listening comprehension as students are learning to be readers to create that full equation. So we've now gotten to the point where we're going to show you all of the free resources that we have for you all to bring this concurrent approach alive. So I'm going to now turn it over to Jill.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Suzanne. And before I begin, I do want to give a shout out to Nancy Eberhardt, who had the idea of bringing the simple view of reading to life through this marriage, this relationship of whole phonics with ReadWorks. And I see it as a stroke of genius, and it's extremely exciting to be part of it. So let's look at the decodable aspect of it. And to Nancy's point, as she was discussing earlier, the way that whole phonics has been developed is that, yes, there's a well-defined